Not Quite Right features discussions that are unfiltered and uncensored and may include themes that are inappropriate for younger listeners. Also, I swear a lot.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
And welcome to the Longlist episode for the April Prize.
And a special shout out to our newbies in particular, because I know there were quite a few this round. Welcome. I hope you enjoyed your experience writing, and I hope you enjoy the podcast episode that's to come. And a special shout out, I suppose, to those of you who did my workshop, my little flash fiction workshop. Welcome.
And you've got another workshop coming up as well.
I do indeed, at Words on the Waves. I think this episode will be coming out just as we're at Words on the Waves, pretty much. We'll be there on the Friday night at Story Club, which is always a good time, and then over the weekend. So if anyone is on the Central Coast, please come join me. So you just go to the Words on the Waves website and you'll see the Writing Upstream program, and I'm on there on the Sunday. So if you're on the Central Coast and you want to learn a little bit more about flash fiction, I'd love to see you there. And
I think there are probably a few people who entered that are on the Central Coast, judging by some of the stories that we got that had a little reference to place on the Central Coast.
I know the one you're talking about. And, you know, we'll be there over the weekend interviewing some of the authors as well. And we do have a separate podcast, which is our interviews podcast. Yep. So if you are interested in author interviews, that will be coming from the Words on the Waves Festival. You find it on our website, or if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you are, just search Not Quite Right interviews, and our interviews will be coming out over the coming weeks, those ones that we do at Words on the Waves.
So this episode is the Longlist episode. It's going to be a bumper episode. We'll start with the submission stats for the April round. We'll go to answering your questions. So some people sent some questions in via our voicemail on the website. We've also got questions from social media and elsewhere, and also from the general feedback form in the prize submission form. So we'll go through those. We'll be shouting out some of our favourite responses and memorable moments from stories that we liked. And at the end of the episode, we'll be reading the long list. Yeah. In its entirety. So as we always say, feel free if you absolutely can't wait. There are timestamps in the episode. You can skip through to the end, check if you're on the list or not, and come back. But we do hope you come back, because there's a lot of great information that we will share with you on this episode.
And just a reminder, so if we do say your name throughout this episode, we might call out a favourite title or a favourite line or something like that. That doesn't mean you made or didn't make the long list. We like to, I guess, celebrate some of those little wins along the way as well. So the long list is right at the end.
And in about a week's time after this episode releases, we will be releasing the shortlist episode as well, in which we will read out the entire shortlist, all of the stories, give our own commentary, and announce the winner. Not Quite Right
which
prize.
I'm so excited for. But I think even if you don't make the long list, it doesn't matter. It's always a good time, because we get to read the stories, you get to listen, you get to say, mine was so much better than that, how come I didn't win? That's always fun to do.
That's the best bit.
Or hell yeah, I did win. That's going to be someone. And you'll also hear, I guess, why they won. We get to share that with you. And I think that's a really cool thing that we're able to do with this podcast, is really give that insight. So everybody who participates can see where everybody landed and why.
And then following that, we will be releasing our Daredevil episode. So 5 Daredevils this round. And so after the shortlist, for the next 5 weeks after that, there'll be more stories to hear. And it's a part of the comp that we love. We love reading the stories on the podcast. We love talking about them, sharing our insights, and basically growing together as writers.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with Daredevil, so that's the on-air critiques, right? These are the people who sign up and pay to get roasted by us, and for us to just dig deep into their stories, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so we do that. We read the stories and then we tear them apart, basically. So that's good fun, not so much for the author themselves, but for everyone else listening in who gets to, I guess, again, get some insight into what we think when we read these stories. All right, so let's get stuck into some stats. I love some stats.
So this round we had 307 entries from 12 countries. That was 12 countries that people admitted to being from. I think it was 121 people who reported where they were from, 46 Australians, 43 United States.
They're catching up.
Yeah, very close. And the remaining, I guess that's about 30 odd people, are from elsewhere around the world, with 15 of those, about half of those being from the UK. And then, Canada and a few other countries. So
there's a handful from New Zealand. Shout out to our mates across the Dutch.
There were 5 from New Zealand. and even one from Romania.
See it, Mum?
It could be my mum, actually. And the gender of our entrants is pretty much in line with what it's been in the past as well. We've had 64% female and 30% male, with the remaining being non-binary or other, or preferring not to say. So that's about where we've traditionally been.
Yeah. And again, that wasn't everybody reporting that, but that's pretty representative.
And age, this time around, I've got a nice little graph that I'm looking at, because we got people's actual age instead of just like an age range. Like, it's a nice little bell curve that peaks out at 40.
Nice.
So right about the age that we are, or that I pretend I still am.
Some of us are.
But it's quite a wide spread. In fact, it looks like every single age is represented between 17 and 70.
Yeah.
Which is quite an achievement.
Like, where else can a 17-year-old and a 70-year-old compete against each other and be
on the same footing?
Essentially. And I love that. I love that it just doesn't matter. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you're from, your age, your background. Anybody can do flash fiction if they want to. I think that's wonderful.
And so the total number of words, total word count for all those entries was 150,103, which is roughly equivalent to Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Only one disqualification this round. One person didn't include the word seal.
Yikes. It's easy done. We've all at least come close, right, to deleting it and then being like, oh shit, if not having actually done that.
And our shortest entry this round was only 200 words.
That's the shortest in a while, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if we've gone below 200 before.
No, we got one that was like 30 words once.
Oh, did we? No, we
did,
got
a long
title
time
that
ago.
was a 30 words one. I don't know if we got a story that.
Anyway,
maybe in the very first round. Yeah. So shortest entry we got this round was 200 words, and it was the appropriately named A Short Sea Story by Alison Colgrove.
And there's a good reason why that was short too, but I'm going to mention that story again a bit later, so we'll talk about that.
Before we get into the prompts and the detailed stats, we had a little bit of a change in the judging this round. We announced it in our last regular episode, and we brought Dean Corey on as an assistant judge for the prize.
I love that he's our assistant judge when his experience in judging is just insane. Literally millions of words read in flash fiction. He's the brains behind, but half the brains behind Furious Fiction, which is a 500-word flash fiction competition in Australia. And he's been judging that for 7 years.
What was the stat? He said he calculated something like 70 War and Peace.
Yeah, right. Or 100,000,
something.
Very
I don't
hungry
know.
caterpillars.
It was ridiculous anyway.
I can't remember.
So way more experienced than us, but he's our assistant judge.
Yeah, and we like to rub that in. But I'd love to hear from him now and get his thoughts coming in with his level of experience, what it was like to judge the comp, maybe get some insights from him about what he liked and so on. So should we
let's
dial
give him a
in?
call.
Hello, guys. It's Dino here.
Hi.
Hello, welcome to the show.
Thanks for helping us out with our judging this round.
You're welcome. It was an experience.
So tell us about the experience. How does it differ from your many years of judging Furious Fiction?
You'd think it'd be quite similar, 500-word stories and 3 prompts. There are a lot of similarities, but it was
very suspicious similarities, you might say.
That wasn't where I was going, but yeah. But well, there is a little bit of that, because I'll tell you what it felt like to me is it's like you guys are the not quite right parents, and I'm the grandparent. And when you've got kids and the grandparent can come over and they get to enjoy the kids, but then they get to hand them back. So that's what it was a bit like. It was like I got to judge the stories and then go, all right, there you go. Now you guys figure it out. But it was all care and no responsibility, which I really loved. And it really did feel like that. I got to read every story, and it was like it always is. It's a real privilege to read. And the thing I love about these kind of competitions like Furious Fiction or this one is that it's an all-in competition. So everyone has exactly the same prompts. Now, I know some of the other comps, you get different genres and different prompts. But what I always love about these kind of ones is that we got to see 300 odd different takes on exactly the same thing. And there were a lot of different takes. That's kind of my take. So that was really awesome. I'm a little bit worried about some of you out there.
Yeah, I want to ask that question actually, Dean. What's the difference between Furious Fiction and Not Quite Right Prize entrants?
Yeah, I think you may have skewed them to be more interested in bodily functions, perhaps. It's a really good question, but I think across the board, there is a sort of a really similar bell curve that you do find in terms of how the way people write and also what they write about. And we've done like 80 odd rounds of competitions over the years. And it is always amazing the number of trends that you follow, even with completely different people every round. There is a lot of similarities more than differences. So no, even though I was sort of saying it's different, the actual story side of things, it's always a cross-section that seems to translate across all the different comps, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, we do see a lot of the same names turn up in our long list and Furious Fiction.
Yeah, I'm always looking out for those names whenever Furious Fiction drops each month.
Yeah, there's a lot of story journeymen and women and people out there who just love a comp. I was one of them. Well, I still am, but not on this competition.
Speaking of which, I got a text just now asking me to stall you from someone who's in your group in New York City Midnight's 100 round 2 and who would like for you to be delayed a little.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, that's dating this recording. Yeah, for sure. That's happening right now. So yeah, after this, I've got to go and write a 100-word story, a 100-word historical fiction. Yes, that'll be fun. But I'll tell you the other thing about this, which certainly is different, is this anti-prompt.
You've got thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, that's something I'm certainly not used to. And all you people out there, you did nearly break me trying to untangle the lexical gymnastics and contortions that you went to great lengths to sort of get your little double negatives or not killing your darlings and all that sort of thing. So I'm sure you guys have got a whole bunch of takes on that. And I've certainly seen many different ways to not kill your darlings or kill your not darlings or however they wanted to do it. So that was fun.
It was definitely a challenging anti-prompt this time around.
You're always going to get people who love a challenge like that. The trickier, the better. And then the ones who just are like, what the F?
Yeah.
So,
all right. So tell us some of your takeaways. Like, did you have some favorites in there? Some things that stood out to you?
Yeah, let's start with my favorite things, titles. Actually, that's what I was going to say. There's probably a lot of people that didn't even realize I was judging because they may have not listened to the last episode. So they'll be like, who is this guy? What? Hang on. I thought it was who's this guy reading my stories? So yeah, hi, I'm Dino. And last time I mentioned I love a good pun in a title. So there was one by Bernie Rushton in their story, Crime Scene, but scene is spelled S-E-E-N, not S-C-E-N-E. Oh, see what they did there? Because, spoilers, but the story is about someone watching the crime scene. So it's Crime Scene. I thought that was, it's very simple, but
what a
fun.
shock. You love the pun.
I love a pun. I also loved this one. It might have got mixed up from the Flash fiction pile because it's called Fisting Fabio.
Yeah, that was the standout title, wasn't it?
Fisting Fabio.
I did
MJ
rush to read that one, I have to say.
MJ McElhaney, Fisting Fabio. That can't help but stand out in the pile for sure, so to speak.
Pay the jar.
Yeah, kitching. The other ones I quite liked were, this one leaned a little bit into the style of the stories we were getting with a lot that to do with killing your darlings, and that was, the title was Select All and then the greater than symbol delete. So Select All Delete, which was about erasing perhaps something to do with a writing or a document. We saw a few of those, which were very clever. That one was by Gail Maitland. Real Housewives of Shanghai. Now, that at first you think, okay, this is going to be a trashy story. This is by April Luang Te. I really liked that it subverted that. It wasn't at all what you expected. It really was a real story, a very real story about a housewife in China, which it just made something different of a title that we're so used to hearing. All the Times I Saw Carl Naked.
That was one of mine as well.
By Christy Hartman. And this last one I liked was, I just loved the honesty of the title called 1 Minute to Find a Title and No Ideas.
So relatable.
It was by Dolphin Jun. I don't know when it came in, but I'm guessing it came in 1 minute before the deadline. So those are the titles. I always enjoy a good title, but those ones stood out to me.
All right. So what about favourite lines? Were there any that stood out?
Yeah, there were a couple of good ones. Well, there's actually lots, and I don't have time to call them all out because we'll be here all day. One of them came from a story called Impermanence by Sarah Lafferty. Hi, Sarah. And I just loved this metaphor. It said, grief is love, a raw, crumpled up version played in a minor key. And I thought that the story dealt, with grieving. I think it was about a lost pet. And it was just a really lovely phrase. So that was a nice one. But they're not all serious. This one from Parrot in a Blender by J.R. Lowe was absolute gold. There is a few good lines in that one, but I could probably count on one hand the amount of brain cells he has left. They bounce around his skull like that DVD screensaver. Sometimes when they hit the edge at just the right angle, he forms a thought.
That's a great line.
That's how I feel. That's very relatable.
We've all stared at that Pong-like DVD logo bouncing around a screen at some point in our lives, so that was pretty fun. And the third one I want to call out is from a story called Tar, which was a fun little title, by Ben Daggers. And that was, this predates the DVD quote, because I try to recall his funeral, but everything's faded and grainy, like a VHS tape worn from overuse. So some of these things, these are metaphors and basically similes, and there were a lot of other really lovely similes throughout.
And it's a nice departure for Ben Daggers from, dinosaur fossil porn, I feel. I just have to shout that one out. That was a writing battle story, but that is still one of my favourite stories ever. So thanks for sharing that, Ben.
That's right. Lots of boning that went on in that one, that's for sure.
All right, so they're your favourite lines. Anything else that stood out to you that you thought was well done?
So many things. I mean, seriously, I read all the stories. I read them at least a couple of times. I made notes on all of them. I've got like a whole notebook. So if anyone wants to send me, $1,000 to my account, then I'll happily provide you with the comments I gave on any of your stories. Anyway, no, I've got some general miscellaneous things which I just thought were worth shouting out. Back on the story titles, we had one double up in story titles out of all the stories. There was 2 stories called The Bottle. Ness and Marty Sinclair both wrote a story called The Bottle. Very different stories, but I thought that was kind of interesting. The word seal, which obviously had to appear in the story, also appeared 8 times in a title of a story.
Yeah.
Okay. I would have thought more,
One
maybe.
of those was... No, that's what I was kind of surprised. Obviously in those ones it also appeared in the story, but it just happened to be in the title. One of those stories was Seal versus Veal by Emily Deutsch. And that she had the only one that I could see that used SEAL as an acronym. So it didn't have dots, so it was fine. It was like it was a SEAL, but that stood for Superhero Elite Alliance League. And I'll leave you to work out what VEAL stood for, but SEAL versus VEAL. So it was kind of one of those ones. What's some other things? We had, in the Killing the Darlings, we had a bunch, probably a handful, I think 4 or 5 Peter Pan related stories. Now, do you know why they were writing Peter Pan stories?
Because of the name.
Because of the surname, that's right. Darling, Wendy Darling and all that. So that was quite clever. It took me a couple of stories to figure it out. I was like, oh, yeah.
I had the same reaction, Dean. I read my second Peter Pan story and I was thinking, what is going on?
God, you guys are slow. I got it immediately. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
It's been a long time since I've read Peter Pan.
She's ahead of us.
That's right.
On that only.
There was also, on the subject of Darling, I think there was just one. So Jack Lewis Edney, you used Darling Sue, which is another name for the delphinium flower. So that was in your story called Darling Sue. So I thought that was pretty cool. You're one of a kind there, Jack. And Sheridan Bell. Okay, so I do love a bit of wordplay. And Sheridan Bell with their story Nipped in the Butt, not bud, Nipped in the Butt. It was basically, the story was just packed full of egg corns, which are misheard phrases, things like, nipped in the butt instead of bud, or old-timers disease instead of Alzheimer's disease, all these kind of things. So it was just packed full, and it was just a word nerd's paradise. So
what did you call it?
Sheridan.
What did you call them?
They're called egg corns.
Egg corns.
Because that's what people mistakenly think acorns are called. There's a whole website. If you just Google egg corns, there is entire lists of words and phrases, like the whole for all intensive purposes, which is intense, and lots of those ones, but really funny ones. There's another word called mondegreens, which is the misheard song lyrics.
Right.
And that's all to do with I laid them on the green, but people heard it as Lady Mondegreen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sure we've got some mondegreens for Kissed by a Rose, right?
For sure.
Okay, couple more, and then we're done. Jaden Christopher, he had a story called Resets and Redemptions. Now, that was an interesting one. It had someone sort of being killed over and over again. But Jaden challenged us in his, I don't know if you guys read this, but he challenged us in his comments box to name the movie that it was inspired by. So, Jaden, I'd like to put my guess in. I think it's Tom Cruise's Edge of Tomorrow. I think that's what you were inspired by.
You know, I don't know, and I'm not going to throw out a guess, but I will say that the first face that came to my mind was Tom Cruise's face. So I heard
Not
resets and
Ian Thorpe?
redemptions. That was already there.
Yeah, right. He lives in there rent-free, doesn't he?
Yeah, totally.
Morgan West's story has a long name. It's not the longest, but Morgan West's story is A Perfect Royal Wedding, or Are You Happy Now, Susan? The Problematic Princess Has Been Deleted. So it was quite clever because it had a bunch of editing notes through it, and then the edits were kind of footnoted below the still part of the story. So that was all about killing the darlings. And we started seeing a lot that used that kind of editing a story. Romany Jane's story Betrayal did that as well, or a similar kind of thing. And then there were a couple of other clever takes. Robert Fairhead's story, The Subplot Character, a character like a movie extra was upset at being cut out of famous books. So I thought that was a really clever take. And another story that did a similar thing with editing out characters was a familiar name, Athena Law. And her story was called After the Undoing, I guess like a Control-Z kind of thing. And its opening line was very fun as well. And that was, there's not enough Pinot Noir in the world to dull the pain of what's about to happen. And many writers would relate to that. Perhaps Amanda and Ed right now can relate to that kind of thing.
It's a bottle right there on the shelf.
So there you go. That's a bit of a kind of a wrap-up of the plots. There's so many other things I could call out, but it was just such a fun journey reading all the stories.
That's great. And I feel like I've learned a lot about you as well, Dean. By the end of it, I was reading stories and going, this is a Dean story, if ever I've seen one. And then scrolling down and, of course, inevitably, there was your comments at the bottom just confirming that. So I think you do love a pun. You do love a clever, fun story.
And a clever idea and often something a bit different, obviously. When you've read millions of words, something a bit different always stands out. But thank you so much for helping us out with this and giving that extra perspective and that very experienced perspective on the stories. I really appreciate it.
Well, if I can say one thing, just to everybody, the long list is obviously being announced at the end of this episode. And if you make it to the long list, you're welcome. I fought all the way for your story. Now, if you didn't make the long list, I'm so gutted. Amanda and I fought for your story, but Amanda and Ed, they just wouldn't listen to me. So sorry about that if you didn't make it. And I was with you all the way, Dad.
We're definitely to blame.
Hey, I've got plenty more notes. What I might actually do is, if you follow me on socials, which I'm on some things like Insta and Twitter and Blue Sky, I might put on some other, after this airs, because the other thing I love is a comment box, as you saw at the bottom of each story. I was loving filling that out. And I might share some of the ones like, comments like, this should be dumb, but it's cute as fuck. So that was a great comment. If you want to find out whose story that was, I might start sharing a few of those.
Are you showing the comments with the story titles or just without context?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I might do a few graphics. I could put them up on Instagram. They could be like those little recommendations you see in the bookshops.
Oh, very cute.
That'd be fun. So you can follow me on, Dean Curry, or just go to Not Quite Right and you'll find me trolling and commenting on there. So you can work your way back. But thank you so much for the opportunity, guys. To you guys and also the everyone listening who wrote a story. It is... Yeah, it never gets old. I've read so many, but this was definitely a new experience and I really loved it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Dean.
And we'll be sharing our own call-outs a little bit later in the episode. But first, we want to get to your questions. And some of these questions have come to us through the SpeakPipe link on the website, also from social media, and also our general feedback form as well.
Let's go. Who's first?
So let's listen to our first voicemail.
Hey guys, Trevor Flanagan from the UK. Over the last 48 hours, you've tweeted about a couple of stories that you thought might have been created by AI. I've seen some in the past where they've had ugly form of prose or disconnected narratives. Just curious as to what gave you a sense that these might have been created by AI. Obviously, you've run through the GPT checker and they've flagged them even further. But love to hear your views. Cheers for now.
And I think we got another voicemail on a similar topic. So let's play that one too.
Hello, it's Sarah Kennedy from the UK. I had a question following from the recent discussion over social media about AI and how you are able to spot it. Mainly asking because my husband, when we had an experiment after that social media conversation, could not tell the difference between a human written story and an AI written story. So what is it that you guys see that raises your suspicions? Thank you.
Look, I think we've talked about AI a few times as it relates to the competition. I think especially in the last couple of months, I feel like I'm taking it a lot more seriously. I feel like we have to take it a lot more seriously as well. It's really becoming prevalent in like academia, in schools and everywhere.
Job interviews.
Yeah, everyone's using it.
Little anecdote. I don't know if my friend would be happy for me to share this, but I have a friend who's been getting emails from her ex and she's convinced they're all written by ChatGPT. Communicating via ChatGPT just to keep it civil. So yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it is important in this competition. Like we've said before, we're technophiles. We value the technology and we know in some ways it's like sort of inevitable that things change and evolve. And from that perspective, things are fine. But then there's this whole other side of like intellectual property theft and I guess fraud, really passing something off as your own work when it's not. And this is a competition for artists to express themselves. And we know there are a lot of people in our community who just have no time for AI. Now, we have a little bit of time for AI within parameters, but we know that there are many of you it's a zero tolerance policy and I respect that.
And we want to see stories written by people. Like we don't want to see AI written stories. And we've kind of said before, like, you know, there's a variety of tools that you can use as a writer that will help you with your writing. You can use Grammarly, you know, you can use ChatGPT to generate ideas, you know, that kind of thing that's not actually writing your story. But we want to see stories that people have written. So
we want to connect with humans. Like that's, I think, what this is all about. We want to connect with humans. But I guess coming back to the question is, how do we spot it in the wild? How do we spot AI? Now, we're not experts, right? And I'm sure there are people who could give you some actual like parameters, the parameters they use on these kind of AI checker websites and so on. But we've got our own spidey senses, I guess. So what are some of the things, Ed, that you see that trigger you?
Yeah, I feel, and maybe this is hubris on my part, but I feel like I can tell when a story is AI written, and it's not going to be like that forever. It's going to get better and better, and obviously there are ways that you can refine a story that's been written by AI. But I feel like if you just put a prompt in ChatGPT and get it to generate a story, it's going to have certain traits. And, you know, everyone talks about M dashes as being one of them. And
it is. That genuinely is.
Yeah. But even just the structure and the type of story, like you get a lot of storybook type narratives. So
very fable, like moral at the end. Yeah,
that's right. Always a moral at the end. And
super structured.
Yes, with a very predictable structure. A lot of the time as well, like there's a lack of any kind of emotional depth. It's a very surface level story. It's about things happening. You know, we talk about like pose single effect and having all of the elements of the story, you know, linked to one common theme and amplify the other elements of the story. You don't really get any of that with AI. You get kind of a very surface level story. You don't get those complex themes and those complex interactions of elements.
I would just add to that as well that there's like this sense of, it's like it's trying to be deep, but it's not.
Yeah.
So it'll say something and it sounds deep, but when you analyze it, it's like, that didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of hollowness to it that you can sometimes identify as well.
I find as well, what ChatGPT tends to do is more than write a story, is kind of write a premise and then not know where to take it, if you know what I mean. Like it will write a scene, but there's no
point.
There's no scene goal. There's no change that happens. There's no point to it. Like it's more just, here's a scene. Whereas if you do write flash fiction, you want it to have that kind of ending that hits you. You know, you want it to like stick the landing kind of thing.
Yeah. And we'll get to sticking the landing too. But you say that, I think probably there are many writers, myself included, who are guilty of doing that, right? So there are these false positives that you can kind of come up with. But I do think for me, probably one of the biggest signposts is it's very grammatically sound, right? There's no errors in terms of punctuation or spelling or any of that, but it's lacking in substance. So we talked about that hollowness, that lack of emotion and so on. But it's like almost suspiciously formal. It's like it doesn't have any, I think you said.
My note here is that it lacks idiosyncrasies. So sometimes people will use words imperfectly. So a word that doesn't quite mean what they've written or evokes something slightly different because of the context it's used. ChatGPT won't do that. It will kind of always stick with the safe words and it will read very safe.
Yes. And I suspect that some of the people who are using these tools to try and win the competition, maybe they have money in mind. I assume so. Otherwise, why bother? But you find these non sequiturs in there as well. So ChatGPT and those kinds of tools will insert these non sequiturs to stuff that sort of doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's a nice, perfect sentence, but just does not fit. But you can also get stories where the author has edited it and added something or taken something away, but they're not as grammatically perfect as ChatGPT was. So you're like, hang on, why is there a typo here all of a sudden when everything is so beautifully structured and now there's this sentence kind of doesn't make any sense. It's a complete change in tone, a complete change in narrative voice that is very, very identifiable. And I will say, because I did post, and the reason why we're asking these questions now is because I did post about it and I did run a couple of stories through. It was Zero GPT, is just an online AI checker. And I will say too, I know these tools are imperfect and I know they turn up false positives. I'm well aware of that and I would never disqualify someone on this basis. But I will also say it was far from an issue because these stories were not good enough. They were nowhere near the long list. But what I did notice was that we had one in particular, one of the ones that I posted about, we've got this grammatically perfect story, but then there's a typo in the title. And I'm like, a bit suspicious. And then I will add to that too, that once we did reveal the names, the blindfolds came off, like we've finished all our judging. And I went back out of curiosity to see there was some sus stuff in the metadata as well. Just some, suspicious things. I won't go into what they were because I don't want to, I guess, call anyone out because it could be a false positive. Yeah. But I guess it, to me, reassured me that we were on the right track when we were suspicious of these stories. So I will say that there might have been a couple of rats in the mix this time, this round, but they were still very, very far from long list quality. I don't know why you would bother. You're only cheating yourself. Like, this is meant to be fun. This is meant to be like challenging yourself. And sure, it'd be nice to win money, but I suspect that the vast majority of people entering this competition, whilst they would love the money, it's not what it's about. So,
and I think like ChatGPT is far from being able to write prize-winning stories, but it will get there with time. And what I was saying at the outset of needing to take this more seriously is because the usage is probably higher than we expect, just based on the one or two cases that we found. And I think definitely going forward, we will be looking closer into that. And there is, doing some research on this, there is a bit of an escalating battle between AI detection and AI detection avoidance. And that's going to be kind of inevitable.
Is that like the police radar thing?
It's like when tigers evolve bigger claws and then the prey gets a bit faster and that kind of thing. So
bigger boards with bigger nails.
Exactly.
No, we'll be looking for those tools. And because we want to support our authors who are coming to this comp legitimately. It's got to be fair. But just to reiterate, I guess, our policy, and it's not going to be word for word, you'll find it in the rules and you'll find it in our FAQ of the comp. But basically, you're allowed to use Grammarly. You're allowed to use those sorts of tools. And honestly, I feel like that levels the playing field a little bit to some degree. It's like a bit of editing assistance, and you need to understand that editing to really make the most of it anyway. So we have no problem with those tools being used. We ourselves use tools like that, whether it's Google or whether it's AI to like search, to look for synonyms of things, to look for words containing the word seal, like that sort of stuff's okay. But once you start actually generating sentences, that's our problem there. So just draw the line before that. If you're going to use it for research, okay. But once it gets to the creation part, that's on you.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is that you don't want to categorically condemn AI because that's a bit ableist.
Oh, that's a lovely throwback. I don't remember what episode that was, but we have had in-depth discussions about this. All right. Anyway, so moving on.
All right. So our next message comes from Natalie.
Hi, this is Natalie from Georgia in the US, and I was hoping that you would tell us which stories match the cryptic clues that you left for us on social media while you were judging, and also which stories got the unanimous 3 S's. Thanks so much.
Oh, so this is a fun one. I do love vague tweeting. It's a joy. I love torturing everybody. Sorry, not sorry. And we had Dean doing it too this round. You were a bit quiet, Ed. You were sort of...
Yeah, and I apologise for that. But I sometimes go weeks forgetting that Twitter exists, and then I remember.
Yeah, because you're on TikTok.
Well, that's probably part of it. Yeah.
Anyway, I did have fun doing the vague tweets, and we had lots of requests to unvague the vague tweets. Now, of course, if I did that right now, major spoilers for the long list. So what we've decided to do is we're going to record that separately and we're going to play that after the long list at the end. So if you are curious about what we were tweeting about, I'm going to tell you. I'll absolutely happy to share, and we're going to save that till right at the end after the long list. All right. So who else have we got questions from?
So the next question comes from Michael.
Hello, Amanda and Ed. This is Michael Stone calling in from Ottawa, Canada. And I've been listening a lot recently to my favorite Aussie band, Holy Holy. And I think over the next couple of weeks, I'm probably going to be listening to their song History quite a bit, because I have a suspicion that when the long list comes out, me and my story are going to be history. And part of that has to do with the fact that I wrote a pretty internal story. And I remember seeing Amanda tweet that you guys got a lot of internal stories this season, and that Amanda was hoping for a little more action on the page. Now, I also saw that one of her early yeses was an internal story. And she said, despite that, it got a yes from her because it kept dynamic throughout. And so what I wanted to ask Amanda was about that. As someone who writes a lot of internal stories and finds himself writing a lot of internality, what to you makes that internality dynamic? What to you makes it work? And what makes it not work to you? What don't you like to see? So just looking for a little insight on that. And Ed, if you'd like to chime in with your thoughts, I'd love to hear that as well. Thanks. Bye.
First of all, hi, Michael. I'm an ex-Ottawa resident, actually, so I just want to say hi. I went there for like a 6-month exchange in uni. I just want to send my regards to Minglewoods, but I think it's actually defunct now, but that was my favourite hangout while I was there. So shout out to Minglewoods, shout out to Fire Station, Retro, all the trashy bars. I hope you go there, Michael. Tell them all I said hi. They'll remember me, no doubt. But to answer your question, we've talked before about internality, stories that are internal versus stories that I guess are more action on the page kind of thing, and what makes them work or not work. Like, I guess to start off with, I will say that internality is an important part of storytelling and it's often there and should be. And when we say internality, that essentially means you're in someone's head, right? So someone's thinking and we're getting insight directly into that person's internal thoughts. And that is as compared to, for example, action happening. So instead of watching them do something, we're in their head hearing their thoughts. Now, like I said, both of those are important parts of storytelling, but I guess it becomes a balance issue, right? And we do get a lot of stories where the balance tips, in my view, unfavorably towards internality or interiority, you might call it as well. The particular story I was talking about, I guess it made sense. It made sense to be in the person's head. We needed that insight because that's really what the story was about. We had a couple this round, for example, that were dealing with mental health issues, and it made sense to be in that person's head to kind of get the insight into what they were thinking. Now, whether those stories tipped the balance correctly or not is, that's completely subjective. But I guess I wanted to go through some pros and cons, basically, because you want this information on a practical level, right? Like, how do I handle this issue? And I will say that it is always an issue, right? We get this each round and there'll be stories that sort of trigger me and I'm like, too interior kind of thing, right? So here's when it doesn't work. So a story that's quite internal doesn't work when nothing happens, okay? So these are the kind of stories when you spend the whole time in a character's head. They never do anything. It's like if we were watching this as a movie, it's just someone standing at the edge of a pier staring off at the ocean. And they do that for the whole scene because everything that's happened has happened inside their head. And us as a viewer we haven't seen anything. Of course, as a reader, you get those internal thoughts, but like nothing has actually happened. And I'm not saying that is never going to work, but it almost never works because it's not dynamic. It's not feeling interesting enough, I guess. There's not enough happening to keep us engaged. And as an extension of that, I will say that those types of stories to me come across a little bit like navel gazing. It's very self-indulgent. It's like I'm just reflecting on this thought I had about like humanity. And while that might be an interesting thought, it's not a story. And through that, I guess, when I say nothing's happening, part of that is that there's no conflict. So this person is just having a thought, and then it progresses to the next thought, and then they progress to their conclusion. And the conclusion might be something that's kind of profound, and it often is, but there's no change that's happened there. That person had that thought, and that's it. So typically in a story, you're expecting a bit more conflict, and you can have conflict in your own head. That's not necessarily something you need action for, although action does help. A second character often helps with the conflict. You can have conflict inside your own head, but like if all you're doing is progressing from one thought to the other, there's no obstacles, which you kind of expect in a story, and there's no stakes. It's like, well, what does it matter? You know, what conclusion you reach. Nothing changes outside your head as a result of this. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I guess, you know, overall it lacks change.
Yeah.
We want to see change, or we want to see something shift by the end of a story. Just on that balance thing again, it's very one note. Okay, so in stories you like to often see a balance of like some scene setting, character development, conflict, all of these things working together in harmony. If we're just getting someone's internal thoughts, it can just be very same throughout the story as well. So that can be an issue. And then finally, I guess another issue that you see a lot with these internal stories is that show don't tell issue. You're just telling me what you think, and I just have to accept that that's the case.
Yeah, I feel like that's the big one when I think about this problem as well. And a lot of these also kind of stem from that show don't tell. It's because you're just getting someone's account of something and it's not really backed up by anything. And I think it's a human thing that we, you know, if you're just told something without any supporting evidence, you just don't believe it or care about it in a way. Like you need to be shown that something is actually true to really connect with it at least. And, you know, even if you have an internal monologue, say an interior story that does exhibit some change, it doesn't feel earned because you're just being told. You're just being told that, oh, I've come to a conclusion. Well, that's great, but we need to see it. We need to see why you've come to that conclusion. We need to not only see it, but by seeing it, we experience it ourselves. So I think that show don't tell is like the major issue.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to this thing as well. I sort of said it can be self-indulgent. Remembering that the reader has a role to play in this story, and if you're just presenting it like a foregone conclusion, the reader has nothing to work with. Like they don't get to do anything. They're just being presented with something, and their only role is to just sit back and take it. Like what a reader really wants to do is kind of form their own conclusion or reach their own sort of understanding of whatever this profound thing is. They don't want to just have that told to them like in a moralistic way. So I guess keeping the reader in mind and not necessarily just being like, oh, I had this great idea, let me tell it to you, but let me show it to you is what we really want to see. So in terms of how to make it work, well, one thing is to just balance it out more, right? Add the scene setting, add definitely character development, right? And add some action. And where that action can still occur from the perspective of the person who's having these thoughts. And in fact, the story I was tweeting about did do that, right? There was action happening. There was movement in the scene being perceived by that person. And I think that that's what made it work and that it kept it moving. But also not just moving, right? It's not interesting to me if the person standing out on the pier looking out to the ocean then walks a few steps and looks at a fish. Like, you know, they have to be doing something meaningful. Their action has to have an impact on the scene or an impact on the person. I think sometimes it's nice when you have that interiority, you're playing off what's in their head versus what they're actually doing. And sometimes the conflict is in that, like the lie, I guess, of what they say versus what they're thinking. Or, you know, incorporating another character as well. So whether there's some dialogue or some interaction between another character that brings in some conflict and so on. Essentially, I guess what we want is we still want a plot. You can develop a plot in someone's head, but you have to do that. Don't just give me a foregone conclusion. Let's see it happen. Let's see that change happen in real time. What's the influence? Why did that change happen? Why did they change their mind, for example, in this particular scene? And finally, like the main thing any good story needs is a satisfying conclusion. So it has to reach some sort of conclusion, not just I had a thought and here it is, but like how do we get here? How do we get to this ending? So hopefully that gives a little insight into how to make an interior story work. I'm not saying it can't be done. It was done a couple of times really well in this round of the competition. And, you know, I think sometimes it's appropriate. So it's not like I hate it, don't do it. And in fact, the best stories, I don't even notice their interior because it's not bothering me. It's all these other things that are the problem, basically. So if you can avoid those, then I think you're going to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to good storytelling and what makes for an interesting and compelling story. And I'm just thinking about stories in general, and how often have you heard someone tell a great story that's just been their thoughts? Like, not very often.
Those are the people I avoid at the party, I think.
Yeah. Sometimes you hear a great story and like the person's thoughts and what their motivations were as they're telling you is an interesting part of the story and enhances its story, but it's never just all the stuff that they've been thinking about. That's just like an emotional dump on you.
That's a trauma dump.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So what else have we got?
All right. So here's our next question.
Hello, Ed, Amanda, and Dean. This is MJ from the United States. I just wanted to say I love your contest and your podcast. And my question is if you would ever be willing to share the feedback of yeses, nos, maybes, and maybe pluses that you put in your judging spreadsheet with those of us who haven't made the long list. It would be really great to know how close or how far we may have been to making the long list and help us with our future writing endeavors, maybe even submitting to a future contest. So looking forward to hearing your response, and thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Like, we have all that data there. Why don't we just publish it and let people know? I guess there's a few reasons why we wouldn't. And the main reason is that we use like our ratings and our own comments to try and compare stories that are very different from each other and try and put them on a quantifiable like ladder that we
which
can
is like impossible.
Which is impossible. And if we say like no or maybe plus or whatever it is, it's not an indictment of your story. Like, that's not really useful information without any context, because what it's saying is like your story wasn't good enough. We're not saying why it wasn't good enough. We're not saying what you could do to improve it. We're just saying no. And that's not helpful. That's going to discourage you.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't discourage you, even if it just encourages you to write something better next time, you don't really know what we didn't like about it.
Yeah.
So that's why we have the other things. That's why we have the critiques, and that's why we have the daredevils, is that we can put some more context. And hopefully also with the daredevils, hearing what other people do right and what other people do wrong gives you that input as well. So we wouldn't want to discourage people, and we wouldn't want to give you information that's actually going to be detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing we want to ever do is put someone off writing. There's not a single person in this comp who I'd say stop writing to. In fact, you know, the lower down the list you are, the more I would say keep writing, please, because, you know, build your skills, because that's all we're all really doing. We're all on this like spectrum, I guess, of experience and understanding, and for some people natural talent as well, you know, that gives you a little leg up. I think if I knew the data was going to be published, I would find it hard to be honest, because I wouldn't want anyone to be discouraged, and no one would get a no, because I wouldn't want anyone to feel like, oh, no, like you're a bad writer, which is of course not what it means to us. So yeah, I think we're not going to publish that data. It's just not helpful. I think one thing that's a little bit different about this comp to some of the other paid comps out there is that there are comps where you can get feedback on your story just by entering. In some cases, just a sentence or two, and in other cases, like a lot of peer feedback, for example, which can be sometimes helpful, sometimes a hindrance, depends, you know, what you get. It's a mixed bag. And we'd love to be able to give that level of feedback to everybody. It's just not feasible. Yeah. I know, for example, there's comps that offer peer feedback, which is free. The cost is you have to spend a lot of time yourself giving peer feedback. And then there are other comps that give feedback to everyone that are, you know, twice as expensive as this comp, for example, because it's extremely time consuming. Yeah. I think it's very hard to see that from the outside, but on the other side, you see very quickly how time consuming that is, especially to frame it in a way that's helpful. To give feedback that's encouraging and balanced takes time. Yeah. And that's why our critiques take so much time. And look, I'm not here to sell the critiques. We don't need to, right? Like, they sell out. Like, we're happy to help the people who want that extra help. And we certainly give a lot of feedback in this long list episode and in the shortlist episode too. That's sort of global feedback that hopefully you can take on board, but certainly not the actual ranking.
Yeah, and so at this stage we do cap critiques because they do take a long time. They're very time consuming. They take, like each critique takes a few hours, right, to produce. So we're looking at ways that we can offer more.
Yeah, so one thing I was thinking, and I would be interested in your feedback if you want to share with us on social media or send us an email. We're thinking that it'd be great to do actually online critiques. So, over Zoom or Teams or whatever platform we decide to use. I'm wondering if you would be interested in that, spending half an hour with me, for example, or Ed, going through your story in more detail. I think that would probably be a more efficient way to do things and might allow us to do it for more people.
And still give the same amount of feedback and have even more personal as well?
I think what I would like about that, because something, I guess, when I'm doing the critiques and when I'm sure you feel the same way, it's like I'm not sure where that person's at.
Yeah.
And I want to meet people where they're at. And I want people to understand what I'm saying. I want them to be able to ask questions back for me to be able to explain if it's not clear. All of that stuff I think would be better done sort of face-to-face, even if that's online. So let us know if that's a good idea, if that's something that you'd like to see. I'd love to meet more of you. So there's that as well. I think it would be pretty fun to talk about your stories face-to-face. But since MJ specifically asked, should we give MJ?
Oh, and MJ is the author of Fisting Fabio.
Fisting Fabio. I can tell you, if you really want to hear, and now everyone's going to hear too, that you got maybes across the board. So from Ed, I, and Dean, we all gave you a maybe. And like I said, I rushed to read your story when I saw that title. I think Dean's comment was, Amanda's going to giggle at this title. And indeed I did. So thank you very much for that. I hope that's not too much of a spoiler, but ask and ye shall receive up to a point. But yeah, how useful is that? I don't know.
Okay, so our next question.
Hello, Ed and Amanda. This is Erin from Canada, the east coast of Canada. I have been following along your torturous, teasing social media posts about the long list for the ongoing competition. And on one of the posts, you talked about sticking the landing, so good ending of a story. And I was curious if you could elaborate on what that means to you. Thanks again for all that you do. I love your contest. Breaking the rules is a great way to learn them. So I appreciate what you do for the writing community. Thank you.
Yeah, so sticking the landing. I mean, for me, it's all about having a payoff to the setup.
Yeah.
Like it has to be justified. There has to be like a moment near the end where you're like, oh, I get it. I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
The story is resolved or the story's given me something. And it can't just be the premise. It can't just be like a really great premise and a few things happen. There needs to be like a killer development in the story that has some sort of emotional resonance. And I know that's really vague. Like say you need to have something, has to resonate, but that's because there's so many different ways to do it.
Yeah, there really are. And I think that if I can be super vague as well, it's like you've got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it sounds so trite, but when you are on this side of the judging table, it starts to become really evident when a story doesn't have all those elements. And so, Ed, you just mentioned then a setup and a payoff, right? You need both of those things. Yeah. So the start is the setup, the ending is the payoff, and in the middle is the conflict or the obstacles. This is what our children are learning at school right now, right? How to write a story. In very simple terms, that's how to do it. Now, I'm not saying it always has to follow that, same kind of arc, but like more often than not, that's what we're expecting and that's what's satisfying. And you're right. It can be many, many different things that make a satisfying ending.
Yeah.
So I will say that this round in particular, I noticed quite a few rushed endings. You could just tell that an ending is rushed, and I've been guilty of that as well. And I did feel like that was probably reflective of the challenge this round of like getting our heads around this anti-prompt, and we'll get to that later on. But it felt rushed. It was like you've got this fantastic story happening, it's developing, everything's really intriguing, and then it's kind of like, and then that was it. And, it's not satisfying, and it's such a shame. And I know Dean would say this too, and has said it to me, that you get these stories that you're like, you're in it. You managed to drop us into the scene. You managed to make us care about the characters, and then it just doesn't go anywhere. And it's so frustrating because we're ready to just be wowed and it just doesn't get to the wow factor. So again, that's vague, but like hopefully you'll be able to develop a skill to see that in your own stories. And certainly if you've got friends who are beta reading for you, then hopefully they'll be able to pick up on that as well.
And like, it's not just the final line. Like, sticking the landing is not just, have you got a great closing line? Does it read nicely as a sentence? Like, it's more about the impact of the story. Like, the impact of the story is really locked into the last paragraph of the story. Like, does it stay with you? Some stories don't stick the landing quite so well because they go on a bit too long.
Yeah.
Like, they'll just have a few more sentences after the landing. And again, going back to like general storytelling, just think of a story something that's happened to you that you find interesting, or something that someone has told you as just a story in their life. You know, there's the thing in that story that has made it stick with you. And that's probably what we're talking about when we're talking about like the landing, is having that element that sits with you at the end.
And that's a really good editing tip, actually. Once you've written your story, sometimes cutting off the last couple of sentences actually leaves you with a much more impactful, like, bam, that's the point. And in flash fiction, you kind of want that impact a lot of the time. Now, I gave it a little bit of thought, and I did come up with a couple of things that I think are worth sharing, because we are being a bit vague here, so I'm going to try and make it a little bit less vague. So I will say, when judging, there are two different things that happen that make me say, this story didn't stick the landing.
Yeah.
All right. So if we can avoid these two things, then we're going to be well on the way. So number one is the clanger. Okay. So there are stories where we're going well and, you know, really great writing and I'm into the character and what's happening. And then womp womp, like, the ending actually annoyed me. And some of these are what we've talked about before is the unearned twist. So it's like, I think it's one thing and then you pull the rug out from under me and it's something else. And like, that's a whole topic in itself. But that can often feel very disappointing or disillusioning as a reader. Like, I thought it was one thing and now it's not. And the writer might think that's clever, but as a reading experience, it's unsatisfying. So there's that. That's the clanger. There is another type of clanger, which is like, it's just awkward. Like sometimes the ending's super awkward or lame. Like, I'm into it and stuff's happening and then it's kind of like, oh, they just finished their shopping list or something. You know, it's like, oh, why did I read this whole story? And it just sort of didn't go anywhere. Exactly. So that's one way. And then the second way that we can have a story that doesn't stick the landing is a story that kind of just trails off and doesn't have an ending, right? So we sometimes describe these as stories that feel like they're all set up and the story hasn't actually happened yet. It feels like a part of a bigger story, or it feels like, well, then what happened next? You know, you've left me hanging like right before the bit that's actually interesting. And that happens a lot as well. So I guess just thinking about, well, what actually is the most interesting part of this story and getting to that? Because I think sometimes we are writing our way into a story, and especially in a piece of flash fiction where you've only got really time to show one scene, sometimes you have to actually cut that whole first scene that you just wrote. Like, if that's the way you work, like if you're sort of writing your way into something, sometimes you actually have to let that part go and just get to the part where the action is happening. So that's, I guess, an option for you to think about. Just keep writing until you get to the killer part that's going to be the most satisfying.
I think that's also like a consequence of how we think about the prompts, how most people approach that. And, you know, you get a list of words or scenarios and most people will think, okay, I want to write a story then about a X who does Y. And, you know, that's a premise. But the hard part is then like, but why and what happens next? And so starting with that premise and not just writing about that premise, which might be interesting, but thinking about, well, how do I, you know, wrap up some change in that and have like a direction that it's heading? And then how do I make it circular so that it has a satisfying resolution? So all of those elements of story come into play, not just the premise and the characters.
Yeah. And look, this is a huge topic. I think it's something that we could maybe share an article on at some point, like how to write a killer ending. So I'll put that on the list. But thanks for sharing your question. It is hard. Like, we've been there too. Like, it is sometimes really hard to find the right place to end. I think crucially, you need to make sure it fits the tone of your piece. It needs to emotionally resonate and leave your reader with some sense of satisfaction at having read your story and feeling like, oh, that was worth my time.
Okay, so let's go to questions and I guess general feedback from the general feedback form on the submission form. So first of all, I think I've said this before, but I love reading the feedback that we get in this form. There's so much just like positive vibes and a lot of people loving the comp, which I love to hear.
You always love it when you've submitted, right? Like maybe not
true.
any moment before that, but like right on submission, like, yes, this is a great life choice that I made for myself.
And some of them are really positive, but they have this undercurrent of like, I almost died writing this.
So we're glad you didn't die. But yeah, we had some lovely comments and I just wanted to share a few because they brought me joy and I think they'll bring joy to other people as well. So AC said, it's been a nasty holiday week with a pretty raging virus and a long weekend alone as my husband and kids travel with family. A tricky set of prompts, 500 words and a comp that's starting to feel like home was just what the doctor ordered to keep me out of trouble. So thank you so much for sharing that, AC. Like, that's really sweet. And we're so glad that we can offer that creative outlet for you. Sandra said, well, Sandra actually shared that she's entered the comp with her son. And I know there's a few little family groups. Yeah. There's husband and wife, there's mother and daughters. There's a few different groups who enter together. And she said it was fun seeing how differently we use the prompts. And I bet it was. And that's so fun. I like to lure people in to write with me as well. So I get that. So for Grace, it was her first time entering and she said with the time limit, it enabled me to not overthink but to write from the soul. And that's so wonderful. Like, I know what that feels like too. It's just like, I just have to get this out.
Yeah.
Like just an urge to get it out. So welcome to the comp, Grace. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope your soul feels relieved at having the outlet. And I wanted to add too that a few people mentioned how supportive the community has been. Now, I haven't even gone back in and logged in yet, but I'm so happy to hear that. I know we do have such a supportive community, people there ready and willing to help each other, like just be their best. So I would encourage everyone to share their stories on the community and share your own feedback too. Like your insights are valuable too.
For sure. So a fair few comments as well on like the technical, logistical part of the process. So last round we had some significant website issues. This time went a lot smoother. I think we had a few like road bumps at the start, but that got sorted pretty quickly. The one main issue we had this round was around the emailing for submissions. So that broke. And it's actually still broken and I need to find a way to fix it.
You didn't break it, did you?
No, it was just one of those things that was working literally the day before and then stopped working and there's no reason for it not to work. It's just baffling to the point where I just have to like recreate the whole form to make it work. Anyway, but it's not something that we want to try and fix while people are actively trying to submit, and so that is a bit of a problem. So we put a note on the success page when you've submitted your story about how that's not working, and you can see your submission there. So when you submit your story, you get presented with like a success page that has all the information that you need, the FAQs, and it also has your story showing up in the box there that you can then post to the community if you so desire. If you see your story there, that means it's in the system. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to present for you on that page. So that's your confirmation if you don't get a confirmation, but we'll hopefully fix the emails for next time around. The other thing that a few people have called out is the fact that the website is slow, which I'm very much aware of. And we have some plans to, redesign and optimize the website to make it faster and also easier to navigate. A few people have called out like they couldn't find the form, they couldn't find certain things when they needed to, and we understand it's time pressure and all that kind of thing. So we're always looking at ways to improve that to make things more visible and more obvious. So this time around, if you go into the lounge, you would have seen like the big banner with the button saying submit here. So that's like more visible, but not everyone knows to go into the lounge. So it's linked in all of the emails that we have. So check your emails, and the lounge is the place where you go for all of your information for the prize, not just the submission link, but you'll find articles there, relevant podcast episodes and announcements and all other information of that nature.
Well, something else worth mentioning is that there's also a countdown clock in there.
Yeah.
And so a few people mentioned in their comments that they had trouble with their time zone, they had trouble doing the conversion, like trying to figure out when the actual deadline was. And inevitably, there's always a few people who miss the deadline, just miscalculate for whatever reason. It is worth mentioning too that we do have daylight savings time where we are. And so it changes partway through the year, and it did change between this round and last round. So depending on where you are in the world, it might be an hour different, for example. But also the language of Midnight Sunday can be a little bit confusing, and we've now aimed to include, wherever we use that language, we've aimed to include end of day, right? Midnight in brackets, end of day, Sunday, because it's a bit like bi-weekly.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Bi-weekly, is that twice a week or once every 2 weeks?
I mean, there's 2 midnights in a day.
Yeah,
depending
exactly.
on how you look at it.
Exactly. And so it is an issue with the language and it's difficult. I mean, we could change the deadline to 11:59 to make it more clear, 11:59 p.m. But hopefully by saying end of day, it's more clear. And there is that countdown clock.
There's a countdown timer. There's also a link to a website where you can put your own location in and it will tell you the time in that location.
So where is that link?
It's in the lounge.
It's in the lounge? Okay, so yeah, you can look up like basically your own time zone and just compare to our deadline. Yeah. So hopefully that's enough information. I guess it's difficult for us. We can't sort of put, the old, was it Hard Rock Cafe? They've got like the clocks, right, of different cities in the world. We could do that, but there's people literally from all over the world.
And we've looked at
just about every time zone. So
we've looked at ways of having like a clock that shows that time in your particular time, but haven't been able to find a way to do it. Like it's possible. It's on the plan.
It's possible. Anyway, just go to the lounge. You'll get your countdown timer and you'll also be able to click the link and look at your own time zone as well. And hopefully we can do the maths together. I know we're writers, not mathemachickens, but we do our best. Yeah. So Godster said that they would like for us to share a list of the place getters and the winners at the same time that we release the podcast, because of course not everyone has the time to listen to all of this lovely, excruciating detail that we go into in this podcast. So we do. We do. And I know that this is not the forum to tell you that because you're probably not listening, but we do that. So you can go straight to the honour roll on the website if you would like to see who made the long list. And then when we do publish the shortlist on the podcast, we also update the honour roll with the winner and so on, but also publish an article separately, which includes the winning stories and the long list there in full as well. So it exists already. You just got to jump on the website for it.
And you'll see all those links in the lounge.
So we had some other very specific feedback on the submission form, and I just want to say we received that. We've taken that on board. We do always want to continuously improve. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on how to make that work better for you. All right. So moving on, we got a question from Alyssa specifically about clarifying content for the comp. So Alyssa said that she was looking for some clarification and said, I know Not Quite Right Prize isn't flesh fiction, so I wasn't sure how smutty/spicy it would be okay for me to get in this story. So what's your answer, Ed? How smutty or spicy is it okay to get?
So we haven't talked about this.
No, we haven't.
My personal view on this is I'm not offended, right?
No.
So you can write as smutty as you like, but it is a flash fiction contest, and the outcome, the desired outcome here is we want to read good stories, and so all of those elements of storytelling that we talk about need to be in there. It has to have that satisfying, sticking that landing that we talked about. That can happen if it's a little bit, spicy.
Spicy?
If we received a story that is fairly spicy and it was great, I wouldn't say no.
No, hell no. I welcome it. I guess there's a difference between something that's straight up erotic fiction, which sometimes has a bit of a different vibe to it, to a piece of flash fiction, which has more of a plot, maybe.
Yeah.
So I guess we're probably still looking for plot. But write whatever the hell you want for a start. Write what you want.
Yeah.
And we will receive it on that basis. And look, we are certainly not offended. There's no limit. There's no limit content-wise on anything, by the way. So if you want to write something pretty dark and disturbing, and we do get some dark and disturbing stories, they're welcome. I'm not saying necessarily that they will resonate with us, or that they will make us feel good and happy and want to showcase them necessarily, but not necessarily not either. So please write whatever you want to write. We're here to read it, and hopefully it does well. So one entrant shared some feedback, and I'd like to be open about this. We are very open here at Not Quite Right. But this entrant said, I wasn't too sure about entering this time. I love your competitions, but it's getting quite pricey. Now, I respect that. There's a cost of living crisis out there. I think our competition is probably comparatively cheaper for people who are living in places where there is a US dollar, for example, which compares pretty favourably to an Australian dollar. And it is different for Aussies entering this comp. But look, we make no apologies about the price of this competition, we're not rolling in dough over here. Yeah. We need to make it sustainable. There is a lot of work, a lot of unpaid work. We're not making big bucks over here to do this. We're just trying to keep it sustainable. So if the price is an issue for you, by all means, respect that. If you have to step away, if you can only do it occasionally, that's completely up to you and your budget and how, the money that you have, I guess, to spend on your hobbies. That's completely up to the individual. And it's obviously more accessible for some than it is for others. But from our perspective, and look, we'd love for this to be free. Hey, if we just all had universal basic income, absolutely. Hell yeah. We love doing this. We would both love to do this full time. If your contribution to the comp allowed for that, that would be our dream come true, because it would just allow us to do more of this, to give back, basically. And that's really what we seek to do. We seek to give back. And, if you can't afford it, that's okay. You can enter free comps. There are free comps out there. And of course, this podcast is free, so you can still join in the fun this way. You can write your entry by all means and still compare it to the other entries that are there. But we always see it as it's similar to, I keep saying this, it's similar to a fun run, right? Yep. You can run that same run if you want. You can run on the road, but if you want to be in the event, then you have to contribute to the costs of running the event, and they are substantial. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend this line of work to anyone necessarily, but there's a lot that goes in behind the scenes, a lot of time. And so we do value you all, and we hope that you see value in the purchase, basically, and that you get value for money. And we're going to continue offering it. And for as long as people want it, we'll be here. Okay. Oh, we got another challenging one here.
So this is from Elaine, who says, your list of winners could use some diversity. And I'm more than happy to oblige. Thanks for the offer. Look, that's not something that we have control over.
No.
Our judging is completely blind. We don't know the gender, the ethnicity of anyone.
No.
Often even after the names get revealed, we have no idea.
No. And so I think Elaine's commenting here on a new addition to the website, which is a little photo gallery of our past winners.
Yeah. So, this is 100% a meritocracy. We welcome everyone to enter.
Absolutely. Everyone all over the world, bring it on.
Okay, so we got a number of comments as well regarding the anti-prompt.
And we always do, don't we?
We always do, yeah. And some positive and some negative. And we acknowledge that this round was one of those rounds that had a particularly challenging anti-prompt, not just because of the rule, and I guess kill your darlings as a writing rule. It's a little bit esoteric, but also the fact that we're don't kill your darlings.
Yeah,
and
it's
having
a bit
that
of a double negative.
Yeah, it is in a way.
It's not, but it is. Yeah, it is confusing.
Yeah, so some people did submit stories which just killed their darlings.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We want you to have written the story for the competition and to engage with the prompts. But if your take doesn't fit perfectly into the box, that's perfectly fine. And so it's very difficult to please everyone on something like the anti-prompt, because some people really love the challenge. And
plenty of people love it. That's partly why some people come to this comp.
And some people love the challenge of adhering to that rule very strictly, right? And others like to be a bit looser. And we try to be inclusive. And what we've said before is, at the end of the day, that we want to read good stories.
So I guess it's worth sharing a comment that came from Ali, which was, it is a challenge for a disciplined writer to include a darling, inverted commas. The call was for a good story, and a darling pulls the reader's attention away from the storyline, or a good description into an irrelevant space. The dilemma was for me to make the darling discreet in order to preserve the storyline, but then I ran the risk of it not being recognised for what it was. So I think probably, Ali, your concerns there are shared by a lot of people. You want a good story, you're telling me to fuck it up. How do I reconcile these two things, and how do I do it in a way that's clear enough that you're going to see that I've done it? And it's a challenge. It absolutely is. Some people met that challenge with gusto. Plenty of people struggled this round. It was a hard one. But I think you make a really valid point. And look, we hear you. So I guess the difficulty for us here is balancing that feedback, because again, there are some people who love the challenge of the anti-prompt and love that it breaks their brain. And then there are plenty of people for whom it's it made me not want to do it, or it made me doubt myself too much and felt really uncomfortable. And look, ultimately, we want this comp to be fun.
Yeah.
That's what we're really aiming for. So in a round that challenged other people to consider their darlings and whether they needed to die or not, Do we need to kill our darling of the anti-prompt?
So we've had some conversations about this because there is that risk that we're asking people to write bad stories, right? And the whole point of the anti-prompt is let's showcase a writing rule, help people understand the writing rule and why it's useful. So there is that like underlying conflict. One of the things that we would like to do, and this is, I guess, short-term plans and long-term plans for the next couple of rounds, is try to make things a little bit more clear, at least from the wording of the anti-prompt. We followed a fairly strict wording, which is break the rule, X. Break the rule, kill your darlings. And that can be a bit confusing.
Yeah, so I guess we don't want to have that double negative problem again. Yeah. So we might be a little bit more direct. And so, for example, in a round that asked you to break the rule, kill your darlings, we might say something like save your darlings or save a darling or give you, I guess, more direction.
Yeah.
And look, that comes at a cost because, of course, we want people to just embrace like the flexibility of it, and that is a big part of it. But at the same time, we don't want that barrier to exist where people are just getting completely confused and lost with it. So for the next couple of rounds, what we really want to do is just increase clarity, make it much more open for people to understand and embrace.
And we want it to be challenging, and we love that challenge aspect of it. But we don't want it to be too big of an ask for a lot of people.
And we don't want crap stories, do we? We don't want people breaking their stories. And what we do see sometimes is people, I guess, overemphasizing the anti-prompt at the expense of story. And that's not what we're looking for. It's an interesting creative exercise, but ultimately we want you guys to be writing stories that you love and that you're proud of. So long-term plans? What's the long-term
So short-term plans is clarifying the anti-prompt and helping to make it a little bit more clear what we're asking for and what those parameters are. And then long-term, from next year onwards, we may be killing this particular darling.
Aww. I know that's going to be really confronting to people because this is like, hang on a second, isn't that what we came here for? But I think what's crucial here, because what's always been crucial is the fun aspect, right? Like, we just don't want the same old prompts, right? We've got our word prompt, we've got our action prompt. We know what to do with those. They make sense. But this evolution is going to be fun. It's going to be something a little bit different, and we hope that you guys embrace it. So if you're listening and you're intrigued about where things might be heading, maybe you're a little bit alarmed about where things might be heading. God, nobody likes change, do they? No. Least of all me. But I'd love to connect with you on social media. So, you know, it's me. Hi, I'm the social media representative. If you want to chat with me about it, ask any questions, share some thoughts and feedback, I'd love to hear from you because ultimately this comp is about you guys. We hope that what we have in store for you is going to be a really exciting evolution. But yeah, interested to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so that's the future plans. Let's get back into the moment of the April round. Let's get into the call-outs and starting with our favourite titles. And titles, you know, I'm thinking back to our very first round of the Not Quite Right prize when we were starting to talk about titles. And at that time, I feel like titles didn't mean a whole lot to me in the context of stories. And I was like, titles don't really matter. But the more we read, the more I feel that they actually do matter.
I'm glad you're coming on board here because you used to just tell me it doesn't matter. And I'm like, it kind of does.
I mean, it does, but like 5% kind of thing.
Yeah.
And look, a title is never going to make or break your story, I feel like, anyway.
No,
like
you're probably
if you've got
right
a great story, it's probably going to still be great even if your title's a bit meh. But I do get an appreciation of a strong title, and especially one that is unusual. And apologies if I offend anyone here, but, you know, one-word titles or cliche titles, while they might...
Why are you looking at me when you say that?
While they might do the job, like they're just not as inspiring as something that is just like, you can tell that it's really been thought about. So Dean has stolen some of my favourites.
Mine too.
But I'll call out A Beach, if you could call it that, by M. Springer, for that reason of like evoking that story.
That's vibes.
That's a very poetic story with lots of vibes. You see that title and you instantly remember that story.
100%.
The next call out is My Peripatetic Soul Longs to Plant Itself Beside You by Joe Binns. And for no other reason than it's poetic and it has that word peripatetic.
I mean, I just learned a word.
Yeah, I had to look that one up too.
Yeah, it's a great word. Like displaced, like travelling. Is that
like travelling but constantly
moving.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dean didn't steal all of mine because I had about 100. I did have to limit it down. But I loved Seal on a Scooter by Charles Maitland. Now, to be very clear, this was the singer Seal on a scooter, and I believe Charles in his comments sort of said, I just had this image of Seal on a scooter and then I had to write a story about it. I love that. That's fantastic. On a bit of a darker note, we had Tree Wrapping by Marion Lee, which was about a car accident, so awful in that regard, but memorable title. We had Laughter is the Sixth Stage of Grief by Natalie Buxko. And of course, we know the 5 stages of grief, right? Coming up to acceptance. And I'm not sure if Natalie got this phrase from somewhere. It just felt like so poignant that I'm like, surely she didn't make this up. But I hope you did, Natalie, because that's pretty cool. And I did actually sort of Google it thinking, where did this come from? And I couldn't find it. So that felt very, very poignant to me. Tonal shift for the next one. We've got Harrison Cluck and the Killer Chicken Sandwich by Emily Gray, which feels like a departure for Emily Gray from previous stories that we've received. But
still somehow on brand, though. Killer Chicken Sandwich.
Similarly, we have Slam Dunk Saloon from Anthea Jones. And I just love that juxtaposition there. Slam Dunk Saloon, like, come on, like that's going to be something new, something different. We had Esther and the Boy Casserole from Lorena Oates, and that really delivered, right? That story delivered on the title. Like you got exactly what that title said you were going to get. And I appreciated that.
Scoop of boy casserole.
Just a little scoop. And then I had to call out this one, of course. We have Pretty and Poe by L.W. Falcons. Thanks for the Poe reference there, the little Poe injection. I do appreciate it.
Just while you were talking about Poe, I was trying to think of a word that designates someone who is into Poe.
Oh, dear.
And the one I came up with was povert.
Oh, my God. Did you see my tweet, though, where I'm like, can someone please write a flash fiction about Poe? Someone make Poe singular sexy. Oh, hello. It's a very specific kink. There's got to be somewhere on the internet for me. I mean, for people who are into for perverts. And then finally, and this is probably my favourite title, I have to say, and this one comes from Alyssa Buchdahl. And hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. If not, I apologise. But let me have a crack at your title here. We have A Court of Clichés and Consummation, an epic high-heat, fast-burn, why choose Grumpy Sunshine, Shift to Vampire, Werewolf, Enemies to Lovers, Romantasy Adventure.
We haven't done longest title this round.
No.
Was this the longest?
It's got to be. Longest and it really packs a punch.
Yeah,
we know what we're getting there. And I appreciated that. Thanks, Alyssa. And I feel like the women of the coven would appreciate that too.
All right. So favourite lines then?
All right. I've got quite a few. So please indulge me.
Okay.
So from The Smile Beneath the Surface by Chelsea Watkins, we had, I'm not a penguin, you sick bastard, I scream. I'm a writer.
We've all been there.
My youngest daughter, her favourite toy is a penguin, so penguins are very close to my heart. But thanks for that, Chelsea. That was good fun. The next one is a first line, and it comes from Zombie Babe by Lou Weasel. And the line is, I can't blast her, not my Jenny babe, even with her eyes crazy as a roll-on deodorant ball and that textbook zombie swagger. I mean, it's kind of sexy, really. I lower my blowtorch.
Very memorable story.
That's good fun. And from Grandma May's Pierogi by A.M. Hathazard, we had Ma scoffed from the armchair in the corner, nose painted white from the glow of her phone. And I just thought that was a really nice, like you can picture it, right? And I've never sort of heard it described that way, but painted white, definitely see that. And then from one of our Peter Pan stories, Summoning Neverland by Shannon Smythe, we had, he looked like Oliver Twist. No, like the Artful Dodger. Like he'd cause trouble if the shadow clinging to his back wasn't dragging him down. That's such a great bit of characterization. Yeah. Like you have to do it so quickly, develop character in these stories, and I feel like that really did it. And then from Roulette by Ashley Sorensen, another first line, a very hooking first line. We had, it wasn't the first time I had a gun in my mouth. So That one makes you think a little bit, I guess. Sets you up for
Does.
something a bit
Makes you want
dramatic.
to keep reading, find
It
out what the
does.
hell's going on.
And hope the gun doesn't go off.
Yeah, jeez.
And then pretty fun story that had quite a few lines that I enjoyed. I'm going to read two. I'm going to, so indulge me on this one. So this was from Creepy Clown for the Win by AJ Blackman, opening with, every trashy romance novel I've read and free porn I've watched have all but guaranteed me that this man, my boss, should be trying to sleep with me. But here we are, 3 years into our working relationship, and I remain unfucked. You know, you're always going to get my attention with a swear word, you know that, but it has to be artfully used,
does,
and that
yeah.
was artfully used, I feel. And then another line from later in the story. I shimmy closer, but the damn nylon pants have me slipping towards him like a fried egg spilling out of a skillet. Like, that's just super sexy, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Real office romance vibes.
It reminds me of, that image reminds me of a certain person we used to work with. Who shall not be named.
Just look at me and I'll see if I can figure it out. Yeah.
That was difficult.
And then another story with several lines that I really loved was The Moon is a Place You Can Go by Kelly Johnson.
Which is a good title as well.
Also a good title. And I got the impression, and I think from the brief explanation of this story as well, that Kelly had maybe taken some of these lines from like her notes app. Like
Yeah,
these were
yes.
ideas I had and I've just sort of crammed them into one story. Now, I'm not sure if I've interpreted that correctly, but that's what I understood. So maybe that's why these lines are so great. It's like you've had these wonderful, I don't want to call it a brain fart.
Let's call them darlings. Is what they are.
Yes. You've got these wonderful darlings that you've got in your notes app and you've managed to work them into a story. I do love that. All right. So here are a couple of them, or three. I've got three. Sorry, indulge me. Help, I whimper. But this is New York, baby, where the pigeons are fat and people will step directly over your defenestrated corpse if it means cutting 0.03 seconds off their commute. Mm-hmm. I mean, I haven't lived in New York, but that's the vibe I get from Sex
from
and the
movies,
City.
Yeah.
And we also had, in this city of sharks, it's vital not to bloody the waters with your weakness. Par exemple, I only ever have 2 nightstands to maintain plausible deniability about having erred in judgment. Plus, regular bouts of nihilism stave off those pesky marriage fantasies. Good fun. And finally, just a quick one. I look at my wrist, watchless for dramatic effect. I love that visual. All right. Moving on now to Choices by Tom Brodkin. A tornado is wind, only it's not. It's death. It's the sight of things flying that can't, the sound of things colliding that shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a great way of kind of building stakes in the story.
Big time. Very, very evocative description. Then from The Silence, the Sea and the Burning Stars by Alexandria Balani. I cut it open with my keys, the serrated edge superfluous, clear tape cracks under pressure, neglect brittling and breaking what should have been strong. I wrestle with the cap, tighter than raised fists, tighter than hiding places between furniture and floors. Leo holds the base as I grit and wrench and twist until it pops free with a wisp of ash. So what I liked about that one, or loved about that one really, was the beautiful subtext that's woven through. Yeah. Like we get a sense of a violent home of these children who have had to, I guess, hide. And that comes out really strongly in those lines there. Then from Petty Kale by Autumn Bettinger, former winner. It's a little dialogue exchange. We have, is that kale? Gemma's eyebrows shot skyward. Dad hated kale. He hates kale, Piper corrected. He's not dead, just pretentious. So you're planning kale to get back at him? Yes, honey, it's petty kale. I thought we could have some with every meal. I love the visual of petty kale. And I know Autumn loves to bring plants into her fiction, and we got some there. So thanks for that, Autumn. And then finally, and thank you for indulging me in my favourite lines. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the judging process, is getting these little snippets of creativity from people. But finally, Betrayal, the annotated version by Romany Jane. And this was a fun one. And I will say it wasn't directed to you, Ed, but let's pretend it was for a minute. So that's a wipeout, isn't it, Ed? Tell me, Ed, who's your darling now? And who is your darling, Ed? Why don't you share some of your favourite lines?
All right, so many of my lines have been stolen, but I still have a few left to call out. The first is from A New Bloom by Lisa Vitale. Maisie yanked the weeds marring her yard, making room for her husband's rose bushes. She sighed, dead husband. And so I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but it's that callback to one of our common tropes, which is the wife who's just murdered the husband and buried him in the rose garden under a rose bush. So the story's not about that, but I thought that was a great opening to kind of call back to that little trope. And from Nipped in the Butt by Sheridan Bell, the opening line, we all know what they say about people in grass houses. I think that's why nobody threw them shade when Dave failed his drug test and was instantly dismissed. So that's a story that's full of puns and malapropisms, or as Dean called them, eggcorns.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a great way to open, I thought, about grass houses. And from Parrot in a Blender by J.R. Lowe, which opens with tits or ass, Braden asks, which is attention grabbing. And I love a story that opens with a deep philosophical question. I think one that humanity will be wrestling with for years to come.
Really just makes you think.
It really does. It really
For a
does.
while.
For a while, at least. And so Dean called out this title as well, All the Times I Saw Carl Naked, but also the first line from that story. It's by Christy Hartman. The first time I saw Carl naked, he was watering his wife's heirloom tomatoes. So just that attention-grabbing first sentence that sets up perfectly what this story is going to be about, the tone of the story, and makes you think what happens next.
You know what's cool about that too is, like, we talk about how often in flash fiction, like 500 words, it's about enough for a scene. But this is the kind of story that spans multiple scenes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But what's cool about it is that they're all tied together by that one thread. And that's what works in flash fiction.
Yeah.
And in this case, the thread is all the times I saw Carl naked. So I think that's a really good strategy.
Yeah, totally.
So just before we go into the prompts, just a little bit of more general, like global feedback that might be useful to some people. So if you reflect back on your story, there are a couple of issues, I guess. And we've talked about a couple. We've talked about that interiority or internality, and we've talked about maybe not sticking the landing. But there are a couple of other things that I noticed this round, maybe more than other rounds, that I thought might be worth calling out. So one of those was a lack of scene setting and visual detail. So I don't know, it's like those things, like once you notice something, you keep seeing it. So maybe it's just a case of that. But what it felt like to me was more than ever, and it does link back to that interiority thing or internality thing, but we've got like a void where a scene should be. Like, where are we in time and space? And I do think that more often than not, that's super important information for us as judges to drop into your scene to see, okay, where are we, when are we, and who's there?
Yeah, because you're trying to make your reader visualize what's happening, and which is impossible to do if it's like a disembodied voice or, you know, a musing. You want to be able to give them that picture first and then develop the story within that picture.
Yeah, I think so. And so I think maybe have a look at your story and have a think about, like, what does this look like when it's outside your head? And you might have this really like vivid picture of what's going on and who's there and what's happening. But unless you're communicating that to us, we're not seeing it. We don't need much. Like a sentence or two is usually enough. But otherwise, we're in a blank room kind of thing, white walls. And the other thing I wanted to call out is that there were quite a few stories, and we do get this typically, but I guess I noticed it this round, stories that I would call just a conversation. Okay, so it's a similar issue to that internality thing that we talked about. All it is two people talking back and forth.
Yeah.
And, you know, that dialogue can be witty, that dialogue can be full of voice, and that's fantastic, but we still need those other elements of story. We still need conflict, we still need a plot, we still need an ending, and we need something maybe a little bit bigger usually. Like, it's okay to have a story that's like not a big blockbuster, right? Like, these little quiet moments can be really compelling, but usually a quiet moment's compelling because of like the emotion that is woven into it. And if it lacks that, if it's just kind of a thing that happened, then it's probably not going to make for a compelling story. So yeah, maybe just have a look back through. Quite a lot of stories did this, and, you know, have a think about that as a strategy for yourself. Like, is this working? Could I add more balance in terms of like more visual detail or more beyond just that back and forth of a conversation?
Let's talk about the prompts now. And 3 prompts as always. We had the word seal, the action of wiping out, and the anti-prompt of breaking the rule, kill your darlings. So let's talk about the prompts individually. First one being the word prompt seal.
So I think it was a great word, like versus ring last time that kind of disappeared a lot of the time. I think seal, like you need to give it a little bit more thought.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was super open. You could basically put it into any type of story. It wasn't limiting the type of story that you could write. So it forced people to think a little bit, but it also just allowed like a real wide range of stories. I think that's the perfect prompt word.
Tell us what some of the common responses were.
All right. So I think this is always interesting. Like, how did my fellow competitors handle this particular prompt? So I will start with the most usages of the word prompt, and that came from The Bottle by Marty Sinclair, which included 16 instances. And this story went hard.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was essentially a plumber fixing a broken seal in someone's home. And so of those 16 instances, most of them were to do with the issue with the pipe. Like, see this seal here? I need the sealant. Like, I just was impressed by how hard Marty went with this. But it also included a couple of unique and creative uses of seal. One was Sealand, right? All one word, like a Disneyland situation. And sea life. It was the only instance we had of sea life. But yeah, I was impressed by how hard Marty went there. I just thought it was hilarious. That was a conversation, but it did go somewhere, that particular one. Now, as for the most common usages, I will say that like I kind of categorize them into different types of seal. And the first one, I will say the most common, for which 128 stories use this type of seal, was closing something, sealing something closed. And like that's a broad interpretation. So it's not just one note. There were many different ways of handling that. So that included 5 sets of sealed lips, memories, lots of envelopes, letters, boxes, including one Pandora's box, bottles, bags, including one body bag, and jars, only one Tupperware set. Hi, Ashley. Doors, rooms, areas like sealing a crime scene, and just a couple of pairs of eyes. So 5 sets of lips, but only a couple of pairs of eyes. And I will say, when I talk about closed here, I also mean unsealed. So we've got closed and opened, basically, sealed and unsealed. We had 3 stories that used hermetically sealed and just 1 vacuum sealed. So I don't know which is the preferable type of sealing here, but there we go. And just a few, like we had lots of different things that were sealed closed. I've mentioned some already, bottles and bags and so on, but a couple of the more unique ones. We had a film canister. Remember those?
Yeah.
A Ziploc bag, like of all the things you're going to seal, like Tupperware, Ziploc bags, right? Like the optimum sealing capability there. And also 1 Pokemon card. So it must have held some value. Peter Davis gave us a brain seal to stop the stupid escaping, which I
we all need one of those.
Yeah, seriously, like please hook me up.
Although I feel like I want the stupid to escape.
Not in public though, that's the problem. Exactly. We had Zavi, who gave us dead bodies sealed with papier-mâché, which is like just so foul. Thanks for that. We had Kay McClure, who gave us a finger sealed in a nostril.
It's a great image.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, we are like, Dean did mention that we're sort of like calling on these bodily function stories, but that was good fun. And I do also want to call out, and I will call her out specifically, Holly Olusegun Olumide Adiola Sadowski, for a perfect seal of a cock in a glory hole.
That was some story, Holly.
That really was. So thank you for that. And as for those middle names, that's Seal's middle name. So I thought you could share Seal's middle names, real middle names. Apologies if I mispronounce them. Okay, so that's all the things that were sealed closed by whatever they might be sealed closed by. So another very popular usage of seal was like a confirmation. So we had 84 stories that used some sort of confirmation. That's how I'm categorizing them, I suppose. And I did actually have a poll up on Twitter. So on Twitter, I asked, which was the most frequently sealed or sealed with thing? And I'm going to ask you for your guess now, Ed. So was it fate, as in their fate was sealed? Was it deal, like sealed the deal, sealed with a kiss, or sealed lips?
I think fate being sealed.
Absolutely, well and truly. So our guesses on Twitter lean towards lips, but no, in fact, it was fate. 41 stories featured fate being sealed. A couple phrase that as the future or like destiny, but some sort of sealing of fate. So that's quite a huge percentage, really. It's not something I noticed, to be honest, as I was going along until I started doing the stats. So it's not an issue, but just, for your interest. We had 6 stories that mentioned a seal of approval specifically, and one that mentioned a seal of removal. So thanks, Sheridan Bell. And that's that same story nipped in the butt, right? So we're sort of playing with words there. And it is fun always to see something a little bit different. So thank you for that creative take. We had 14 stories that had deal being sealed, seal the deal. And we had 6 stories that were sealed with a kiss, none of which were a kiss from a rose.
No,
but
on the grey.
Okay, some other common takes of seal. So we had 10 stories that had a seal that was like an insignia, like the royal seal kind of thing. We had 9 that were a stamp, lots of wax stamp seals. Those were those envelopes and letters that were being sealed. We actually, and I'm sure the authors will be surprised by this, but we had 4 stories that mentioned the golden seal plant or flower, one of them made into a tea, all of them being crucial to the plot. Okay, another quick question. Which do you think was most commonly seen, Seal the Singer or a Navy SEAL?
I would say Seal the Singer.
Actually,
is that not true?
They were the same.
Oh, okay.
We had 6 of each. We saw Seal the Singer 6 times and we saw Navy SEAL appear 6 times. And, it was always a joy to see Seal the Singer. So thank you if you injected him into the story, whether he was on a scooter or otherwise. We also had 6 stories that mentioned breaking the seal. Dean mentioned it earlier as well. So breaking the seal, I'm not sure how common that phrase is around the world, but meaning like you need to go to the toilet, you go one time, and now all of a sudden you need to keep going, usually when you're drinking.
In fact, it's used exclusively, I think, when you're drinking a lot.
I use it all the time.
Oh, do you?
It's still an issue outside of drinking.
Just drinking all the time?
No. Anyway, go on. Do you have thoughts and feelings about breaking the seal?
So Dean suggested we talk about this in his notes about the phenomenon of breaking the seal, as he called it. This has struck me as, I don't want to get on my high horse about breaking the seal as I did about moons.
On your dry horse.
But so it's phrased in this way of like, once you break the seal, like it keeps coming out. But isn't that just because there's a delay? Because when you're drinking constantly, it takes time for the water or the liquid to get extracted out of your blood and via your kidneys and into your bladder. That process might take an hour or however long it takes to slowly fill up your bladder. And then you go to the toilet, but that's still happening because you keep drinking. And it's not the fact that you've broken the seal. It's just that there's that delay.
Okay, fine. But like if you go to the toilet, you empty your whole bladder, right? So it's empty.
Okay, think about it this way. Imagine your bladder is attached to the end
Do
of
I have to?
Okay, let's sanitize this, because imagine you have a balloon at the end of a very long pipe and you're constantly feeding water into the system, right?
Yeah.
But it takes time for the water to go through the very long pipe before it gets into the balloon. And so slowly the balloon fills up. But first of all, it takes all that time for it to go through the very long pipe, slowly fill up the balloon, and then the balloon gets full, and so you empty the balloon. But immediately the balloon keeps filling up because you've got all this water that needs to go through the very long pipe into the balloon. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I don't know if that's true, if there's like some other nerve or sensory factor involved as well. I invite, and I know we do have some doctors who listen to the podcast, I invite the doctors out there, anybody who has specific knowledge about this, to please enlighten us, because it's very important information. All right. Now, of course, apart from all of these things, what's the other type of seal that we might see, please?
Like the animal?
Like totally the animal, right? We had 49 stories that mentioned the animal seal. We had a few different breeds, which is nice. And we also had a few different takes, and I just wanted to call out a few specific takes which incorporated an animal, but maybe in a little bit of an unexpected way. So Christy Hartman had a seal bark laugh. So we're just comparing a laugh to a seal, which is cool. S.A. McNaughton had a seal, but like an animal seal, was made of glass. Yeah. So it wasn't alive. Moira Richardson mentioned specifically a seal emoji, which is good fun. And Chelsea Watkins had it like a physical animal seal, but it was demonic.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Which is lovely.
That's lovely. Like, why not? Now, some people took the animal of the seal and just like broke it down into its component parts, you might say. So we had Piper Odolin, who had seal skin, and then Jay Schultz, who had seal meat.
Okay.
Like, I hope those were the same seal at least.
Yeah, nothing goes to waste.
We had Stephen Huff, and I want to call out this line in particular, but referring to a seal pose, right? I'm about to nuke them when one dangles its feet over the edge of the air intake, plants its hands and arches upright, seal-like, the way Ange got up after a lazy Sunday screw. That's a real vivid
that's a great image.
So thanks, Stephen. We actually had 3 authors who included selkies.
Yeah.
And a selkie is kind of like a seal mermaid, right? And it's only something I learned about last round. Last round of the comp. So it's kind of cool when people are on the same wavelength like that, I feel. And then finally, in terms of animals, we had also a Sealyham Terrier.
Yeah.
Or Sealyham Terrier, I don't know how you pronounce it. But a dog. Right, yeah. But with the word seal, and then one rose eel moth too. It's apparently some sort of Brazilian breed of moth. And I do love when you can tell someone's gone down a Google rabbit hole on the seal prompt or the word prompt. That's really good fun.
All right, so some more rare ones. Natalie Miniker used seal as a word prompt, in the same way as we did, which is very meta. So Dauphine Jean used a hypothesial reaction, which I didn't know about.
No, that's well above my pay grade.
Thomas Kane had a horse called Seal the Deal.
Love it.
Very good. Elise Scott with a character called Sea Lord Beatty.
Love it.
Eloise Keary with a place called Seal Point, where some characters went surfing.
Of course they went surfing. Can't wipe out without a surfboard.
Michael Stone had a reference to Seal Script, which is ancient Chinese characters. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think seal that's the kind of word that we look for, just something that you have to work to get in there, but it has a lot of flexibility.
So look out for more words like that in future rounds of the comp.
All right. So let's move on then to the action prompt, which this time around was wiping out.
So the most common take, and probably unsurprising given the group of prompts that we had, was killing something or someone. Right? So we've got killing our darlings, of course, and then we've got wiping out. So you can wipe someone out, right? You can kill them. So 92 stories, so a huge percentage of the stories, almost a third, had some kind of killing going on. And that's a broad interpretation. Oh my God, and it is really pissing down right now. So apologies if you're getting a little bit of white noise in the background. We also had erasing, cleaning or wiping something. And there were 90 stories that used that usage of wipeout. And to be clear, some stories did more than one. So if my stats here add up to more than 307, that's why. 51 stories used wipeout in terms of falling over or falling off something that could have been a surfboard. And in fact, it was only 12 stories that included wiping out off a surfboard, although more than that included surfing. And I think sometimes we do unintentionally implant ideas in your head when we share the prompt image. And that's fine. That's great if that inspires you. So that's really cool. And then the next most popular after that was exhausted, I'm feeling wiped out. And that was around about 20 stories that used that. So we also had a lot of wiping the slates clean. We had crashing out in cars as well as surfboards. So wiping out in a car, skateboards as well, slipping, falling over, just one banana peel, which is maybe a little bit disappointing.
It's surprising.
People love a bit of slapstick. So thank you to that one banana peel. So yeah, I guess probably a lot of people very wisely paired the two together. So we've got the anti-prompt and the action prompt working together there. And it's not necessarily just killing off one character. In some cases, it's wiping out all of humanity, wiping out a whole species, wiping out a story character. Also, with the anti-prompt, not necessarily just killing darlings, but getting onto that level of the author, killing their darlings. If we're thinking of a more faithful interpretation of the anti-prompt, we're talking about wiping out a character, for example, or wiping out some of your text that you wrote. Then we've got a few stories that were along those lines. We had graffiti being wiped out, whiteboards being erased. A few people had their life savings wiped out. And finally, Sandra Tom Jones, which in itself is a great musical surname, used the song Wipeout in her story Holiday Spirit. And I have to say, like, when we were creating the prompts, like, that song was totally in my head the entire time. But yeah, like a bit of a mixed bag there with the Wipeout prompt. Pretty much in line with what I was expecting, to be honest. And again, hopefully, like, open enough to allow a few different interpretations. One observation I would share about this prompt was maybe that a lot of people use the wording of wipeout and you didn't necessarily need to use that. So we're pretty flexible, and what we just want to see is that you've thought about and included it. There are other comps that are maybe a little bit more, I don't want to use the word anal, but anal about the prompt usage, and like it's very specific. It has to occur within the story, that sort of thing, which is fine. That's the rules of those competitions. For us, it's like, look, it doesn't matter that much. We want to see that you've adopted it, but we don't need it to sort of fit any certain parameters as long as it's there. And for that very reason, we do say you don't necessarily need to use the wording. And yeah, I think there are a few stories that maybe use the wording that maybe shouldn't have.
Yeah, I felt this round more than the word seal. That really stood out to me. And yeah, I mean, it's not a big deal. Like either way, it just stands out a lot more.
It does. And I think we are looking for those words. And so you've got to be careful.
Yeah. And it's not only that we're looking for them, we're just reading them over and over again. So it's almost a cliche for us at that point because we're reading so many.
I think that's fair to say. And I think as well, like, I know the anxiety around it, but I just encourage people to like make sure, I guess, that the language that you're using fits the tone of your piece. And I think that in some cases, the language of wiping out, inverted commas, didn't really fit the tone, or it didn't fit the character, whatever it might be. And so you can be a little bit more relaxed about it. And that's why we have that brief explanation field as well, just to give you that opportunity. Like if you are nervous that we're not going to pick up that what you said was wiping out, you have an opportunity to explain that to us so that you're not going to get disqualified. And look, the likelihood of you being disqualified is really low. It might impact how your story is received once we start getting to that shortlist end of things, but ultimately, like, you do have an opportunity to explain it if you need to. And I think most of the time you can just sort of trust that we're going to get it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to do just a couple of very specific shout outs. So one is to Sam James with Chartor Ergo Sum, which I don't speak Latin, but I think it translates to something like I map, therefore I am, something like that. And that was talking about the wiping out of a paper town. And a paper town is like a fake town that gets drawn into a map, which is there specifically to kind of preserve the intellectual property of the people who, who create the map. And so, but it was like very literal. This person's like, hang on, you removed my town, I live there kind of thing. It was interesting take. I thought that was kind of cool. And then also Moira Richardson with The Marine Biologist. And in this story, Moira used the term wiping instead of swiping. We had a bit of, like, we're talking about dating apps here. And we had a character who was kind of a little bit new to the world of dating apps and was talking about wiping the app. And I thought that was really fun and sweet and a nice bit of character development there. So those were probably the two that stood out to me as the most unique kind of takes on the action prompt.
All right, so let's talk about the anti-prompt now. And we've already spoken about like the vibe.
Do you know what I think the problem was?
Yeah.
I think that the killing your darlings as a prompt immediately sent people into killing darlings in their mind. Like as a story idea, that's pretty compelling, right? And so once that idea's in your head, it's very hard to kind of undo that. And kind of hang on, now I've got to take all the drama away from that story and now we can't kill them. And of course, that's not satisfying. So I completely understand how that got like soupy in people's minds. So we sort of broke it down the stats-wise into those who took it literally, in other words, killing a darling or not, like not actually killing a human darling or some other sort of precious darling. And there were 206 stories. So like 67% of the stories who like approached that literal interpretation. Like I said, I think once that idea was in your head, it's pretty hard to shake. And from there, we also had, and again, like this is not going to equal 100%, right? Because people did more than one at times. But 75 people or 24% took a more faithful approach. So looking at those literary darlings, whether it be that more purple prose that we're a little bit overly proud of, or maybe a character who doesn't quite fit the narrative. So plenty of stories who took that approach. From there, we had 61 stories that we classed as a goes hard. So those were stories, so 20% there, who took it and ran with it and really went hard, whether that be like literally or literarily. And then there were 10 stories that we just had question marks for because we really just weren't sure and there was no sort of way of understanding exactly what they were going for. But, you know, we assume that there was an attempt made there to approach the anti-prompt. And I guess there was another criticism, and I sort of meant to bring it up before and didn't, but a little criticism, I guess, maybe of the anti-prompt or of the way that we handle the prompts here at Not Quite Right is maybe that what's the point of having an anti-prompt if we're not forcing people to be faithful to it, right? Like what's the point of challenging people to break the rule, kill your darlings, if we don't then police it, I guess, and say, no, you had to take a literary approach to this. We need to see some darlings here. So what are your thoughts on that?
That is a great point. And it's a hard one. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier talking about the anti-prompt. You know, there's different groups of people and different people get different things out of competitions. Some people really love the challenge and sticking to the rules and making sure they write within the rules. Other people come for the fun of it. And we love that too. You know, we love to see people writing for the fun of it. We love to see people who challenge themselves. And for me, when it comes down to it, when we're judging, it is about the story. We want to see that you've engaged with the prompt and you've had some sort of response to that prompt. Not that you've ignored it or that like there is some very like minor justification for how you've met it. That probably won't fly, especially when we start getting to the shortlist level. So there is still that level of challenge there. It's just that we don't want to exclude people who have still made the effort, but maybe have not taken a strict interpretation of that challenge.
Yeah, I think it's already a pretty tough sell, right? Like it's already pretty hard. We acknowledge already that there's a barrier there for some people. And I know plenty of people who are like, I've been thinking about entering, but then I don't know, what the hell is this anti-prompt thing? And like, we want you to enter. We want to have fun together. So I think ultimately we don't want that to be a barrier. We want it to be a challenge, yes. We want people to rise to that challenge, but the extent to which different people rise to that challenge is going to be different, right, for each individual. And we're not going to say to someone, you're not good enough, because that's just not how we roll. You're welcome to say it yourself individually. You're welcome to judge and critique the entries differently to the way that we do. But I guess that's just how we do things. And I know for some people it can be hard even to get past, for example, typos. Like if you've got a typo in your story, then that story is not 100%. And therefore should never win kind of thing. And that's just not how we approach it. For us, it's did you move me? We can fix a typo, but did you move me? Did this story mean something to me? Like those are the bigger questions for us. So you're more than entitled to have a different perspective. That's our perspective, and that's just how we roll.
And I guess that's one of the problems with the anti-prompt. We're trying to achieve two things that are like fighting against each other, right? So writing a good story and breaking the rules, they're fighting each other and there's conflict all over the place, and which is why we're looking to move towards something that is more aligned with what we want to see. You know, we do want to teach people about the writing rules. We do want to see great writing help people improve, but we also want to encourage people to write stories that are great. And sometimes breaking the rules can force you into a bit of a corner. And that's why we also allow people to break that rule to some extent and take like a figurative approach, because we don't want to get a story that breaks that rule to its own detriment. So like there are all of these kind of conflicts with the anti-prompt, which is something that we like, I think creatively, that has inspired a lot of great stories.
We've seen some really cool stuff.
Yeah, but it is also a huge challenge. It requires quite a lot of like extra knowledge, and every round we publish an article about explaining what the anti-prompt is, and it requires a lot of extra understanding beyond
Extra
just
work.
writing your little story. So we really understand that is a challenge for some people and also a problem for some people. So I don't think it's possible to reconcile with the format as it currently stands, the people who want A and the people who want B. That is like the strict interpretation. I'm an accomplished writer and I want to challenge myself at that level versus someone who's coming in at new and wants to explore things. And
who's learning the rule for the first time
Yeah.
and then being told to break it. Like
Yeah.
that's pretty bloody
Massive
tall
challenge.
order. Yeah. Anyway, so I think all that in the mix, I'd love to talk about some maybe specific takes. But first, before we get into some of those specific creative takes that this big challenge has evoked, I'd like to know, how would you have handled the anti-prompt? If you were presented with this break the rule, kill your darlings, what would you have done?
Yeah, so the first thing that came to mind, and this is like, again, acknowledging, apart from the general anti-prompt difficulty, I think this was a particularly hard one because it set that challenge of not doing something that is dramatic. And like, okay, if I told you, hey, don't kill your darlings as the thing in your general life, you'd just be saying, okay, cool. Like I wasn't going to kind of thing. Like you're not actually asking for anything if you boil it down to it. But we're saying not just do nothing, we're saying don't do something in particular, which is a bit of a challenging ask. So level of complexity there is quite high. Degree of difficulty is quite high. The first thing that came to mind just thinking about this prompt was like the biblical story of Abraham,
Oh, yeah, totally. That's front of mind for me too.
I'm a very religious person, and so my mind always goes to the Bible first. But no, that's the... So I talked to my priest about it. So that's where my mind went first, like, because that's the story about not killing your darling, right? There's, God tells Abraham to kill his son and then gets to the top of the mountain and he's like, no, just kidding.
Lol.
So I was thinking initially just like that could be a premise for a story, just like a retelling of that story with a different twist, not telling that exact story, but another situation where someone is forced and commits to doing something, but then at the last minute they get a reprieve. Like there's a story that can be told along those same lines. So I think that's one way of doing it. And, thinking about that, I'm surprised I don't think there were any Abraham-related stories.
No, I don't think so.
So maybe that was...
There were certainly darlings that weren't killed in that way, but not that choice.
Yeah. So, and an alternative, and I guess maybe along the same lines, is like a character who makes a poor decision or commits to something stupid and refuses to give up on that idea. So I think that can work as a premise as well. I don't know what that dumb idea is, but like, it's dumb. Everyone knows it's dumb, but you follow through on it.
Can't help yourself.
What about you?
Love it. I would love to read those stories. Okay, so I guess for me, I was thinking about it maybe a little bit meta, but, when we had the article there, it was like darlings are something that doesn't reveal character, doesn't progress the plot. It's kind of extraneous information. Yep. And I was thinking about that more in real life. What are the things in my life that don't reveal my character, that don't progress my plot? Just sidebar. It's raining really heavily right now, so apologies if you can hear that. But so for me, like the parts of my life, those memories, just things in your life that just didn't really mean anything necessarily, but which still feel really important. And I guess I had this vision of creating this kind of nostalgic piece about meaningless moments in your life. And I guess the challenge there is to make that interesting. But I do think sometimes those nostalgic stories can be good fun. Trying to find meaning or a bigger meaning in just the passing moments of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that maybe it's not like core to who I am, but it kind of is.
And that's a huge theme. Like I imagine that being a theme for like a movie, you know what I mean? Or a novel.
I guess I'm just at this stage of my life where like my memory is just Swiss cheese at the moment. And it's like trying to look back on a life and trying to make sense of it and what's important and what's not. And the memories that feel like really important memories are like all merged together sometimes. And it's not even an accurate like view of what even happened, but it's like how I see myself now is because of these things that have happened. So anyway, that was just my idea, but like by the by, because I didn't write it, but we did get quite a few stories that did have some very, very creative takes. And this is the thing about the anti-prompt, and this is why it is our darling, right? Because it does inspire these really like out there, crazy, but very cool and impressive ideas that I don't think you would have otherwise. So I do love it for this reason. Okay, so one I wanted to start with comes from Wanted, Dead or Alive, Arson Andy and Shadow Sharon by Chloe Page. And the reason this stands out is because we're talking about break the rule, kill your darlings. She decided she'd kill our darlings, right? So my husband, Andy, aka Arson Andy, apparently, and your wife, Shadow Sharon. This was like a Western story that they featured in. It was nice to not be us for a change, but I thought that was really good fun. And in fact, technically only Sharon dies, sadly, by her own hand, I think, really, like in this kind of twisted ending there.
And this was super intriguing to read as well, and just be like, who wrote this?
Who wrote this?
And what made it more intriguing was the brief explanation field was just a little smiley face emoji. I was very keen to find out.
So thanks for that. That was good fun, Chloe. Very good fun. So in the same vein, I suppose, was the sandcastle test by Phoebe Robertson. And maybe wouldn't have known this without the brief explanation field, but Phoebe decided to kill one of my darlings. So not Andy this time, fortunately. But in Phoebe's brief explanation, she said, the Not Quite Right article defines a darling as any aspect of a story which the writer is proud of or otherwise emotionally attached to, but which doesn't serve the narrative. So for this anti-prompt, I've taken a stand for us authors. I killed one of our Judge Amanda's darlings. Specifically, I have refused to name my protagonist. Sorry, Amanda. Long live ambiguity. So thanks, Phoebe. I'm sure Dean is very well and truly on your side there. He doesn't necessarily agree that you need to name your protagonist or your narrator, but like that's good fun. I'm glad you're having fun with it. I stand by my policy of naming your main character or narrator. It's not essential, but it does help.
It's a very controversial policy, I've heard.
It's not a hard and fast policy. It's a piece of advice which you are free to ignore, as Phoebe did. What about you?
All right, so we had The Deal by Di Percy, in which someone else does the killing of your darling.
Yeah, palm it off.
Darling still dies, but not by your hand.
Yes, very clever.
2 stories, After the Undoing by Athena Law and 1 Minute to Find a Title and No Idea by Dauphine Jean. And they both had this idea that if you don't kill your darlings, they'll kill you.
Yes, very clever. So all of these are just like finding creative ways to still kill the darlings, basically, but not take responsibility for it, which I love. And also just a shout out to Athena for having a character in her story who kisses a poster, which is very dear to my heart. So thanks, Athena. I know you're writing to your audience there. It's very much appreciated. And this was one that I called out right at the beginning. We were talking about the shortest story, 200 words or so, and that was A Short Sea Story by Alison Colgrove. And the reason I sort of mentioned, of course it's short, right, was because this story incorporated sibilants throughout. So you might call it alliteration normally when like words start with the same sound, but when it's the S sound, it's sibilants. And A Short Sea Story incorporated sibilants throughout. So it's hard to sustain that for more than 200 words, but that was a really brave take on the anti-prompt as well, like just keeping all of that in. And I do love to see that bravery. I love to see like, I'm just going to go hard with this and see what happens.
And we had The Real Housewives of Shanghai, which we have mentioned already, by April Lung Te, about China's one-child policy and the kind of decisions that creates.
So in this story, I think it was a woman who was pregnant finding out that her child was female and basically paying off the ultrasound tech to kind of lie about it and say, actually, it's male, so that she could keep the child. It's such a sad sort of idea. And of course, that policy is not in operation anymore, but I'm sure a lot of damage was done in that regard emotionally while it was. I can't imagine.
Yeah. So this was a pretty unique take. In the story, UK government urges people to kill their darling, and it's a hyphen in there, darling, by Joanna Hunter. Darling is named in part after its Cambridge-born creator, Victor Ling. It's a domestic augmented reality device, or DAR, the first of its kind ever to be produced. So, bit of a sci-fi take there on the idea of darlings. The Necromantic Oath by Georgina Maxine, in which a coffee drinker brings her barista back to life. And the coffee drinker in this scenario is like a necromancer who's charged with freeing, liberating souls. And in this case, she just couldn't do it because that person is responsible for their coffee.
You guys are so addicted. Like, it's an issue.
Believe it or not, yeah. I mean, you better believe it. That's what I'm trying to say. I fucking need a coffee.
It is nearly midnight. All right. We also had, and this was one of those like takes where we're getting into that author-writer thing and looking at the more faithful take on the anti-prompt. And this was Lawman by Simon Davis, where we had a character called Long Sentence, and the story was about not killing the character Long Sentence. That was part of the story. And I thought that was really fun, like just very meta. So thanks for that, Simon. And there were quite a few stories that took that real faithful approach. And in fact, Dean called out a couple where we actually had footnotes and editor's notes or responses to an editor and looking at the process of writing and editing a story. And that was interesting.
I felt like we got a lot more meta this time around than we have in past rounds.
And
surprisingly, there were 2 stories that I recall that used footnotes.
Yeah. And, we're writers, like we know what that process is like. And finally, I just want to read the brief explanation from Alexandria Balani, who's former second placer in the Not Quite Right prize, with The Silence, the Sea and the Burning Stars. And Alexandria said, slaps roof of story. You can fit so many darlings in this bad boy. Apologies to anyone who's not familiar with that meme, but I very much am familiar with that meme and appreciated that. And she goes on to say, in case it's not obvious, I found this anti-prompt incredibly liberating. I have a lot of darlings that I regularly check myself on when writing stories. Motifs of the stars and sea, the rule of threes, alliteration, metaphor are a few that are featured here. It was amazing to be able to write something that really is for me, something I find authentic and beautiful and downright cool. As I said in my previous submission, I hope you guys love it, but I'm proud of it, even if you don't. And I'm so happy to hear that. And I could see a bunch of stories, to be honest, where like the author was very clearly going hard with an idea and it don't care if I win. I just feel free. Like, let my soul speak. Like, I love it. And I feel really privileged to read those stories where you just let loose. So thank you to all of you for embracing what was a challenging anti-prompt. I know some of you loved it, some of you struggled, but for those of you who entered, that is always a win. Absolutely always. And we appreciated all of your takes.
Yeah, so like that really struck me this round is just the number of many and varied takes on this anti-prompt. And I feel like it was even more so than past rounds. And I think maybe just the way that these 3 prompts came together, I felt like despite being very challenging, they really inspired a lot of different kinds of stories.
Yeah, there was so much variety. And it really felt to me like people probably spent a lot more time thinking about their stories this round. I mean, I don't know. It's like, how can I know? But it felt like a lot more effort went into thinking. And then the writing was kind of like, okay, now I've got to write at the end kind of thing. Processing these prompts, trying to get an idea that worked, no doubt for many people, having an idea, deciding it didn't work, trying to work out something else. And, like that effort has been rewarded. I think there was some really, really cool stuff going on here.
Yeah, you're right. I'd say there was more like high concept stuff, like the couple that had footnotes as part of the structure. And there were also a lot more that were meta about writing and had characters that came to life and tried to save themselves from being killed. That was a common recurring theme. So a lot of like that more high concept stories that were built around this idea of the anti-prompt. So yeah, good to see it inspiring creativity. It was really challenging this round and you all did so well.
Yeah, very, very proud of you all.
But now we're up to the business end. Slaps this bad boy. You can fit so many long listers in this.
Oh, I wish we could fit more. And I just want to preface this long list by saying this was the biggest bloodbath of all the long lists so far. Like, I know we always talk about what a challenge it is to come up with a long list, and it always is, but this was next level. This was like stories were just getting cut. And I want everybody to know, if you did not make this long list, like, you might have been so bloody close that it would drive you mad. There was nothing in it. It is completely subjective. So many incredibly well-written stories with cool ideas that just maybe got cut for like the slightest reason. So be proud of yourself. You achieved a story with very challenging prompts. I hope that they live on.
Yeah.
Beyond this comp, and many do, right? If you want to go submit to lit mags and so on, please do. We'd love to hear about it if you are successful. But of course, there is always a long list, and there are these people that we want to reward and praise for like getting through a cutthroat round. So all the more impressive, I guess, if you made this long list this time.
So without further ado, here is the long list in no particular order for the April 2025 Not Quite Right Prize for Flash Fiction. A Priest to Know God by Torrinell. Resets and Redemptions by Jaden Christopher. Tar by Ben Daggers. Infestation by Stephen Huff.
A Box Beneath the Rosebush by Theo Carr. A New Bloom by Lisa Vitale. Balloon Guy by K.R. Emanuel. The Sandcastle Test by Phoebe Robertson.
The Necromantic Oath by Georgina Maxine. Laughter is the Sixth Stage of Grief by Natalie Bucksco. Zombie Babe by Lou Weasel. Grimoire She Wrote by S.J. Snyder.
A Beach, if you could call it that, by M. Springer. My Peripatetic Soul Longs to Plant Itself Beside You by Joe Binns. The Peter Pan Wedding Massacre by George D. Skeletons in the Closet by Lucy Mack.
The Art by Harry Humber. The Reoccurring Resurrection of Alastair Emrys, Part 13 by Chris Schneblin. One Small Step by Ella McAuliffe. Whip_final.doc by Corey Haldane.
The Ambiguity of Identity. Just Who Are You, Carla? By W.J. Arthur. Borrowed Time by Eloise Keary. Crime Scene by Bernie Rushton. Wanted, Dead or Alive, Arson Andy and Shadow Sharon by Chloe Page.
Creepy Clown for the Win by A.J. Blackman. Chalk Sister by Holly Brandon. Night Driver by Sarah Jordan. After the Undoing by Athena Law.
The Moon is a Place You Can Go by Kelly Johnson. In the Pale Moonlight by Greg Schmidt. All I've Got Are Menthols by Farah Pascal. The Other 1% by Emma Makarova.
Parrot in a Blender by J.R. Lowe. Choices by Tom Brodkin. All the Times I Saw Carl Naked by Christy Hartman. To Fill a Fox by Chloe Thornhill.
Pickling Memories by M.M. Schreier. The Silence, the Sea and the Burning Stars by Alexandria Balani. Petty Kale by Autumn Bettinger. And finally, Hoarders Season 36, Episode 7 by Ashley Adams.
So congratulations to all our longlisters. Well done.
Huge well done. It was a bloodbath. You did survive it. And just a reminder that our winner and our shortlist are contained within that list of 40 names. So one of you has won the competition, and we will find out in the next episode who that person was. I should point out that I did notice a little something with the names, and I feel like there might have been a little confusion this round between pen name and maybe like a forum username. So if you are on the long list and we got your name wrong, or you weren't expecting that to be your pen name and you'd like that to be corrected, please get in contact with us. But you will find your little badge in the honor roll section of the website. So please go there and check it out. If it's incorrect, let us know and we'll fix it up for you. But absolutely, please share your badges around. Make a big fuss because it's a huge achievement to get this little pat on the back every now and then for your writing. And we're very, very happy for you.
So you'll find the link to the honour roll in the lounge.
Commiserations, I suppose, if you didn't make the long list. But like I said, that's absolutely not a referendum on your ability to write. There were so many stories that we unfortunately just couldn't include. And if you had a critique package, like we'll be able to share that with you. If you had a Daredevil, we'll be able to share it with everyone. And we'll be able to tell you like why or why not and what those maybe tiny little differences were that kept you off that long list. Maybe bigger differences. It depends. But yeah, for those of you who are on the long list, you are all currently still in Schrodinger's shortlist, I guess.
That's
like
right.
You're all contenders at the moment for the prize money, of course, the trophy for the winner, and inclusion in our anthology at the end of the year. So 6 of you will appear on that list. And in fact, as a little surprise, we also offer 2 wildcards, right? We each pick a wildcard winner that gets a $100 cash prize. And this time we've decided to invite Dean to award a wildcard as well. So an extra cash prize for one lucky author.
That's right. So there'll be 9 winners, which we'll be announcing next episode.
And just a reminder, the wildcards aren't necessarily on the long list either. So if you didn't make the long list, there's a possibility that you might still win a wildcard. And nevertheless, it's always great fun to, I guess, hear the stories read aloud, hear maybe our insights into what worked for those particular stories and why we chose them, why they rose above in the bloodbath.
Yeah, so thanks again to everyone for entering. We've still got a little bit of work to do this round. We've got our shortlist coming up. We've got our Daredevils coming up as well. But again, just to say thank you to everyone who entered. It was a really tough round. You did really well just to get a story in. And for those who made the long list, like you not only did that, but you survived one of the biggest bloodbaths that we've had. So congratulations to everyone who entered. I can't wait to read out your stories and record our next episode. And just a reminder that we also have another competition running, which is the Not Quite Right prize for flesh fiction. And that remains open till the 24th of August. So if you felt you were holding back a little bit in the flash fiction prize, then maybe the flesh fiction prize is for you. And we've got quite a number of entries in there already, which is great.
And there's 1,000 Aussie dollars up for grabs, as well as some spicy other prizes.
Some very spicy prizes. So have a look at the website.
And start your shopping list. But yeah, we have a bunch of categories, a bunch of different spice levels. If that's something that's interesting to you, we're hoping that like all those of you who are similar to us who have seen erotic fiction and gone, I could do that. Like, here's your chance. This is your chance to prove yourself right in that regard. But of course, apart from that, we also have the next round of the Not Quite Right prize for flash fiction. And if you are looking forward to entering, we will be providing additional clarity this time around the anti-prompt. So if that's something that's felt a bit intimidating to you, we hope that that will be something that's a little bit more straightforward next time, while nevertheless still being a creative challenge.
And just stick around as well after the end credits, because we will talk about who the vague tweets were about. So if you want to know if your story was vaguely tweeted about, just keep listening. But apart from that, next time you'll hear us will be for the shortlist episode in about a week's time, and we cannot wait for that. So until then, right on.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to Not Quite Right. If you'd like to reach us via email or follow us on social media, you can find all the links on our website, notquiterightpodcast.com. That's WRITE. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting app.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
So Amanda, tell us about your vague tweets.
Ooh, I'm excited. Okay, so I went online and said, okay, which ones do you want me to specify? And it was like, all of them. So I'll do my best, all right? I'll do my best. And I'll go through in order, sort of from when I first started tweeting. So the one that was like a what I called a very clever and multi-layered handling of the anti-prompt, which spoke to me on a personal level. That was A Priest to Know God by Toronel, who's a former winner. Yes, and that featured a character who was struggling with OCD. That's something that someone I love is struggling with at the moment, and so I guess that gave me a little bit of insight into what that might feel like. And I also just thought that was a really cool handling of the anti-prompt in the sense that it's like those OCD thoughts kind of are your darlings, right? Yeah. And trying to stop them being killed, like you're protective of those. But it's also like, this is how I interpreted it anyway. It's also like you're not removing those things that fail to progress your plot, you know? So it's kind of like a cool, real version. Yeah, that's how I saw it anyway. And I thought that was very clever. I also mentioned a story with a wild take on the word prompt. And I said, are you guys okay? And I mentioned that I'd be calling it out for a favourite line as well. And that was The Bottle by Marty Sinclair. And I mentioned in the episode that Marty went hard on that word prompt. And I thought that was super fun. And Marty didn't make the long list. But Marty, I want you to know that you had my vote because I thought that was good fun. So the word seal was used 6 times, but the specific line was a line of dialogue. Let's just say that I don't want to pursue any separate resealing projects. How long till you'll be done? I try not to sound too cunty. So thanks for the C-bomb. All right. So I also mentioned 2 stories in a row that made me sick to my stomach. And I said, far from being offended, I'm thrilled for these authors that they were able to deliver that kind of real world impact. And I also mentioned that there was big long list potential for both. And in fact, they both did make the long list. And that was Tar by Ben Daggers, which featured a little demonic boy creature who feeds on human blood. And it was sort of described in gross detail, to be honest. But I'd like to thank Ben for making it a boy this time, because I think I did mention last time that it's always the demonic girl with like the hair in their face, you know what I mean? So thanks for making it a boy this time. But also Infestation by Stephen Huff, which talked about an infestation of like dozens of tiny naked women, which is a very memorable story. But it was just, they were described like kind of cockroaches or rats or something. It was kind of gross and one got squished and I was very unsettled by that. But I also mentioned later on in the piece, I said, some of you seem determined to make me vomit this round. What have I ever done to deserve this? And that was specifically referring to a story by Zavi G. Zochi, and apologies if I've mispronounced your name, but the title of the story was You Can't Skip Breakfast. And in this story, the protagonist, I guess you'd call the main character, apparently, at least this is how I read the story, killed his whole family, right? Covered them in papier-mâché and was eating breakfast with them, but like stuck googly eyes on them. So they're like rotting inside. Block your ears if you have a sensitive gag reflex, but like talking about pus and dandruff, and he's like wiping it and scratching it onto their plates and like talking about eating. It was so disgusting. But like, again, like if you could make me feel sick, like that's kind of cool. Like, I don't know if you use your words, like you're using them for evil here, but like it's pretty impressive. Okay, I also mentioned my first yes for the long list, and I said this story's all voice despite the word prompt usage of sealed lips, and that was Balloon Guy by K.R. Emmanuel. And that was a really fun story as well, as told like sort of like I'm telling you this text message exchange, I'm reading it out to you and like interpreting my text messages, and like I do that all the time with my friends, so that was good fun. So my second yes for the long list was a story that I mentioned was quite internal, and that's something we talked about quite a bit in the episode there. But I said that this author kept it feeling dynamic throughout, and that was Hoarders Season 36, Episode 7 by Ashley Adams, which was the last one there on the long list. And this character was someone who's a hoarder, right? And it was quite internal, but there was action happening as well. There was dialogue. Basically, this person was being featured on the TV show Hoarders and being confronted by, I guess, these people trying to clear out her home. And yeah, there was stuff happening and there was change, and the character herself was reacting to what I guess the producers of the show were doing and reflecting on her relationship with her son and all this stuff. So I felt that was quite compelling and well handled.
Also a great take on the anti-prompt there.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really cool. The yes of mine that I mentioned was a new spin on an old classic. That was the Peter Pan Wedding Massacre by George D. And it was like a police procedural, but it was like a murder at this wedding. Of course, the darling survived, but Peter Pan didn't. His shadow didn't. And the visual of the shadow, very flat under like a sheet, was like a really cool, memorable visual from that story. So thanks for that, George. I said, ooh, it's a good run because I just typed, and I quote, possible shortlist material. And I said that this story involved a life or death decision. And that was Zombie Babe by Lou Weasel. That's not to say that that story made or didn't make the shortlist, but that's the one that I mentioned. And that's just my opinion. Of course, there were 3 judges this round. I said 3 yeses in a row. Who am I? What a joy to read such beautiful work. And for those playing at home, this entry features an object that's tightly sealed. And that was My Peripatetic Soul Longs to Plant Itself Beside You by Joe Binns. My 4th yes in a row. And I think at this point I need to disclose that at this time I was reading Dean's top picks. So that's why maybe there was a few more than usual in a row. But I said, I need to lie down. This is unsustainable. Let's see if the other judges agree with my enthusiastic scores. I can tell you this story is set at night and features a faithful take on the anti-prompt. And that was The Moon is a Place You Can Go by Kelly Johnson. And of course that did make the long list. So congratulations, Kelly. And then the 5th one, I said, if I get my way, that's 1/8 of the long list sorted. I'm clearly on some sort of roll, so let's hope your story's among them. I can tell you that this story features a green vegetable. And hello to Autumn Bettinger with your petty kale. I did appreciate it. When I said this story had me absolutely hooked, I'm thinking this is shortlist material, but then the ending just fizzed out. It's impossible to overstate how important it is to stick the landing. Now, I don't necessarily want to call this author out because that feels a little bit harsh, but if you think it might be you, you can contact me and I'll be happy to tell you if it was or not. But if you're worried about your ending fizzing out, then maybe it's an issue and maybe work on that for next time. I will say that this story, and I think you'll agree with me, Ed, it would have made the shortlist and it didn't.
Yeah.
Because of the ending.
Very disappointing.
So disappointing. So friggin' close. So super important, like we say. Now, the one that I said that me and Dean both wanted to steal independently, wanted to steal this idea. And I'm sort of reluctant to say it because then I can't steal it and Dean can't steal it. But credit where credit is due. And that was Chartor Ergo Sum by Sam James about the paper town that was getting written off basically. But like very literally someone was like, no, but I live there. You can't delete my hometown. And that was a super cool idea. So Sam, big credit to you on that one. And if you see me or Dean writing that, then sorry. You inspired us. All right. When I laughed and said, you guys are such trolls. I'll have you know my husband would never hurt a fly and Eddie's wife is far too smart to walk into a trap like that. That was, of course, Wanted Dead or Alive, Arson Andy and Shadow Sharon by Chloe Page. When I said, Holly Matilda Sadowski, if that was you, I'm going to need to send someone over to perform a Welcher check. That was The Edge of Glory by Holly Sadowski. I did pick it. Thanks for the Johnson reference to help with that one. Yeah. And I'm so sorry because I'm sure you're disappointed to not find your name on the long list there. You really did take it to the edge, didn't you? And okay, it didn't make the long list, but we bloody appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You went hard. Now go home because there's someone waiting for you and they're going to cart you away in your straitjacket. So I'm safe to say this now, but my next comment, which was, I just watched a story, Return from the Dead. So I'm watching you in the spreadsheet, right? Because we share this document online and I can see you making edits and stuff. And I'm going to call myself out here. I had cut this story. This was one that, again, friggin' bloodbath, right? So, it was hard. I liked it. I loved it, really. And we're trying to figure out where things sit. And this one I had cut and Ed saved it. So thank you to Ed. But that was The Necromantic Oath by Georgina Maxine. And quite ironically, it was a necromancer bringing her barista back from the dead. So you got risen back from the dead, Georgina. And I'm so glad you did because it was a wonderful story. Okay, and finally, maybe the biggest question mark of all that people had was like, I posted some pictures of our judging spreadsheet, and there were 3 stories that were unanimous yeses, right? From you, me, and Dean, one of which, in fact, was a favourite of yours. I didn't have any favourites this round and didn't have any favourite children. Now, I will say all 3 of those made the long list, as you'd expect, right? They didn't all make the short list, though. No. Because once you get to that top level, like we're looking at you, you're there and you're getting some serious attention. But for whatever reason, some other stories might have snuck in around you. So what I can tell you is that the one story that was a favourite of Ed's and which also received a yes from me and a yes from Dean, that's our winner.
Yeah.
And we will find out who that winner is
next time on Not Quite Right.